Chapter 505. The emperor slowly closed his eyes and said, "You overestimated my patience. I underestimated your power in the palace." The eldest princess gazed at the emperor and panted. "I know you have always been giving me chances. In reality, I have also been giving you chances. As long as you don't want to kill me, I simply cannot summon the courage to harm you. In this life, I am already used to being behind you. It is not an easy matter to completely stand in front of you. I don't want to harm you, so I have never acted. Yet, you have made me despair." Li Yunrui panted. Shortly after, she smiled gently and said, "So, kill me. If I am alive, I will do everything in my power to kill you." "No one can kill me," the emperor said calmly. Then, his hand slowly tightened. At this time, the knocking outside Guangxin Palace strangely stopped. A strange light flashed through the eldest princess' eyes. "You are my sister." The emperor suddenly extended his hand and gently stroked her cheek. He muttered, "Even if you are not well behaved, you are still my sister." This was the last conversation the emperor and the eldest princess had in this world. Then, the door of Guangxin Palace was cut open by a few blades of light that were as white as snow. After a crisp hiss, the palace door collapsed with a bang. The Empress Dowager walked into Guangxin Palace, accompanied by old eunuch Hong and surrounded by several tiger guards. Her face was calm, but her eyes were unusually panicked. "Son!" The Empress Dowager looked at the shocking scene in front of her and screamed. The eldest princess glanced at the emperor close to her with a slightly dazed gaze. She found that after the emperor heard this scream, a self-mocking smile rose to the corners of his lips. She didn't know who this smile was mocking. One finger, gradually loosened from the eldest princess' red neck. It was like a poisonous vine on a tree branch gradually losing its strength. The emperor closed his eyes and used a long time to calm his breathing. He then slowly pulled back his hand and turned his body. Slightly tidying up his dragon robe that had been messed up by the eldest princess, he expressionlessly welcomed his mother. Holding her hand, he quietly said, "Mother, let's go back." The Empress Dowager's gaze stopped on the eldest princess who had collapsed against the palace wall and was caressing her burning red neck. She was trembling all over. The emperor tightened his grip on the Empress Dowager's hand and gently said, "Mother, let's go." Although his words were gentle, and although he expressed a compromise, it was also filled with an irresistible majesty. The Empress Dowager's hand trembled again as she said in a trembling voice, "Go back to the palace, go back to the palace quickly." The emperor suddenly stopped his steps at the door of Guangxin Palace. The expression on his face was as calm as ever, but his brows furrowed slightly. He said, "I believe that all the people in this world are my people." The expressions of the tiger guards who had broken into the palace earlier froze. With a few gusts of wind, the tiger guards following the Empress Dowager let out a few miserable groans and fell into a pool of blood. The emperor respectfully held the Empress Dowager's hand as they left Guangxin Palace. Old eunuch Hong followed behind him with his hands in his sleeves. The palace gates of Guangxin Palace closed once again, shutting off the eldest princess's panting sounds inside. The court conference had been delayed by an hour. The opening time of the 13 city gates of Jingdo had also been delayed by an hour. This hour was enough for many things to happen in the royal palace. It was also enough for the civil and military officials in court to have a general idea of what the emperor had done. Thus, no one dared to actually go to the royal palace after an hour. All of the officials attending court followed their original time and waited obediently outside the royal palace's city gates. However, the atmosphere today was very strange. No one gathered together to discuss or chat. Even exchanging pleasantries seemed to have become a crime. The abnormal silence made everyone feel a sense of pressure. Before dawn, most of the eldest princess's power in court and in Jingdo had been swept clean. Some of these powers were not even known to the officials in the past. The operation this time had come so quickly, acted so decisively and ruthlessly, and pulled the net so cleanly and efficiently. It made these officials feel a glimmer of coldness. It was said that the person in command in Jingdo was that old dog of the Overwatch Council. The officials knew how high the level of this matter was. Standing in front of the royal palace and analyzing their own thoughts, they understood that this world was, in the end, the emperor's world, not the prince's world, much less the eldest princess's plaything. As long as the emperor wanted to make a move one day, he could easily sweep these people clean. It was only at this moment that the officials recovered their usual reverence for the man sitting high on the dragon throne. Only then did they remember that they seemed to have gotten used to His Majesty's silence over the years and had forgotten his supreme glory and great achievements in the past. However, the officials could not just silently accept it because they didn't know what would happen in the court conference next. If the emperor wanted to use this matter to carry out another large purge of the court, the elders of the Hall of Governmental Affairs were worried that the Qing Kingdom's bureaucracy would not be able to withstand such a storm. Commissioner Fan had already arrested too many officials. If he arrested another group, who would work for the court? Even more people were guessing how Her Highness the eldest princess had offended His Majesty and ended up in such a state. No matter what, these officials could not guess the true cause of the incident. Naturally, they could not associate it with the bloody and gloomy scenes in the imperial palace. There was no news coming from the royal palace. It seemed very calm. The whips rang out. The officials lined up in order. Among them were the scholars Xu and Hu, who were at the very front of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, as well as the Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian. However, there were a number of people missing from the ranks below the dragon chair. These people were probably in the Supreme Court or the Overwatch Council. The officials entered with their heads lowered. After a moment of silence, they were shocked to find that there was no one on the dragon chair. Xu Wu glanced at Hu the scholar worriedly. Although he didn't say anything, his gaze had already conveyed enough information. This old scholar had served the emperor for many years. He knew the emperor's will and methods. Since he had said to delay by an hour, then the emperor must have the confidence to finish everything within an hour. Given the emperor's bearing, he would not do or say anything he was not confident in. However, an hour had passed and he still had not come to court. Could it be that the matters in the palace had become so troublesome? The rain in Jingdo had long stopped. The red clouds of dawn floated on the horizon. Although it was not hot, it was enough to make those who saw it feel a glimmer of warmth. However, the Qing officials in Taiji Palace felt cold, nervous, and uneasy in their hearts. Following a eunuch salute, the man wearing the dragon robe finally arrived late. After the loud cries of "Long live the Emperor," he spoke in order, handed over memorials, and passed them down for approval. All of the procedures of the court meeting appeared smooth and natural. On such a morning, no one dared to make the emperor the slightest bit angry. Xu Wu raised his head and stole a glance. He found the emperor sitting on the dragon chair with a calm expression. There was only a slight hint of exhaustion. Someone had to do anything that provoked bad luck. After all, the rules of the court were there, and the civil officials had their duties. 2 ministers had suddenly been arrested and thrown into prison, 3 out of 10 imperial censorates of the imperial censorate were gone, and 2 large bloody cases had suddenly appeared in Jingdo. For such a major matter, it was impossible to avoid it even if one pretended to be deaf and mute. Xu Wu sighed. After quietly apologizing to himself in his heart, he stepped out of the ranks and slowly spoke of what had happened last night. He then respectfully asked for the emperor's edict. The emperor propped his chin on the chair. After a long silence, he slowly said, "The matters of the Overwatch Council are all under my orders. These people are all in prison." Normally, Xu Wu dared to directly clash with the emperor and sternly admonish him. He knew that this was only because the emperor needed a somewhat comical and frank official like him. However, today's matter was very important. No matter what, he could not rashly ask. He swallowed and moistened his somewhat dry throat from nervousness. Respectfully, he asked, I do not know what Minister Yan and the others have done. The emperor glanced at him, closed his eyes, and waved his hand. Eunuch Yao had already taken out a number of memorials and files from the yellow silk box beside the dragon chair. He jogged down the royal platform and distributed them to the old officials standing at the very front. Of course, old people like Xu Wu and Fan Jian knew what was written in the memorials and files. They had long guessed it, but when they read it themselves, they still had to show an expression of shock, anger, and guilt. The files were, of course, the results of the Overwatch Council's investigation. The crimes of the officials who had been thrown into prison last night were all as clear as could be. The confessions were all there, and the witnesses and material evidence had already been sent to the Supreme Court. It was completely against those officials. It was impossible to give them any chance to turn things around. The three expressions these officials put on in court were to show the emperor that they knew nothing about the crimes of Minister of Appointments Yan Hangshu and the others, which was why they were shocked. As colleagues in court, they were incomparably angry at these sinful officials who took the emperor's salary but deceived the emperor and bullied the people. As for guilt, it was because they had been in court for many years, yet they had not discovered these sinful officials' wild ambitions ahead of time. They had not told the emperor ahead of time and exposed these people's ugly faces. They could not escape the crime of not knowing people well. They had worked hard for the emperor's sacred judgment. They could not help but feel ashamed to the emperor, the court, and the people of Qing Kingdom. These three expressions were done very well, but the emperor's expression remained indifferent. A self-mocking and mocking smile appeared at the corners of his lips. The reason he had come to court an hour late was because he had to comfort his mother in Hongguang Palace and take care of everything in the royal palace. It was clear that he had not explained to the Empress Dowager the reason for his anger. Strangely, the emperor was not very disappointed that he had not been able to secretly erase the eldest princess. Other than the three expressions among the officials, there was one more expression. It was one of fear and terror. The dossier had been circulated around the court, and there were already 4 officials kneeling on the ground. These officials were all people who had some relationship with the eldest princess in the past, and they couldn't escape from the matter mentioned in the dossier. As soon as they saw the dossier, they knew that their doomsday had arrived. These 4 officials knelt in Taiji Palace and kowtowed with all their might, but they did not cry out for the emperor to spare them. They knew that the emperor hated those who shamelessly begged for mercy the most. The emperor glanced coldly at the 4 officials and said, "The crime does not reach the masses." The 4 officials' bodies shook. It was as if they had not thought the emperor would so easily spare them. The joy after the shock made one of them unable to resist sitting paralyzed on the ground and unable to speak for a moment. The emperor furrowed his brows and glanced at that person but didn't say anything. After the court conference, all that was left in the royal study was the true center of power in the Qing kingdom. The Hall of Governmental Affairs, as well as the heads of the 6 ministries and 3 temples, still sat on embroidered stools as usual. However, these important figures seemed to feel like they were sitting on the tip of a needle and were very uncomfortable. There were no crown princes listening. The officials were guessing in their hearts, but they did not show anything on their faces. The emperor glanced at these people and slowly said, "There are some things that I can say in court, but there are some things that I can only say here because you are all pillars of the Qing kingdom. The emperor's family matters are also part of the affairs of the country. You must know." Everyone's heart tightened. They knew that this was going to talk about the eldest princess matter. They quickly bowed forward. Yan Hangshu and the others are only claws and teeth. I will not kill them lightly. The emperor leaned against the low couch and said, "I will not make any major movements in court. Never mind, you can read first." At this moment, the files in the hands of the ministers were not the ones that were circulated in the imperial court. Instead, they were true secrets, so the ministers did not need to disguise the three expressions, because these three expressions came from the depths of their hearts. The eldest princess, Li Yunrui, betrayed the head spy of the Qing Kingdom's Overwatch Council stationed in northern Qi, Yan Bingyun. Colluded with the Ming family, secretly formed pirates, and stole goods from the palace treasury. Secretly ordered the Jiaozhou navy to massacre the island. Ordered assassins to assassinate court officials in the streets. Shu the scholar's fingers holding the files were trembling. Although these officials knew that the eldest princess was powerful and ambitious, they had not expected it to be to such an extent. In particular, these 4 crimes were too frightening. When the Qing kingdom and northern Qi were negotiating, the northern Qi people had suddenly thrown out a bargaining chip that caught the Qing kingdom unprepared and shook the court. The capture of the head spy of northern Qi had been single-handedly orchestrated by the eldest princess. The shock of that matter was too great. Many officials still remembered it vividly, particularly after a snowstorm of words floated through Jingdo. Each word on the paper pointed directly at the eldest princess and forced her to leave the capital helplessly. Yan Bingyun was now the head of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. This was something all the officials in the royal study knew. The officials had thought it was just a verbal attack. Unexpectedly, it was true. This. Shu Wu's heart was filled with anger, but he couldn't say anything. The investigation in the files was too detailed and clear. Even if these officials didn't believe it, it was still difficult, particularly since the witnesses of the last 3 crimes were still locked up in prison. There is a little thing called the Juanshan Conference, the emperor said with his eyes closed. It was something Yunrui made. Although the account's master ran, in the end, the Black Knights still captured a number of people. As for the assassination in the streets, those 2 assassins are still in prison. Hu the scholar was slightly more composed. Although he didn't know why the emperor wanted to bring the matter of the royal family to the table, he still asked sincerely, could there have been a mistake? After all, it was all the results of the Overwatch Council's investigation. These words were spoken very clearly. Everyone understood. If these great crimes were truly pointed at the eldest princess, there would be no possibility for the eldest princess to rise again in the Qing kingdom. However, everyone knew that ever since Fan Xian took control of the Overwatch Council, he had fought to the death with the eldest princess, openly and secretly, in Jingdo and Jiangnan. If the eldest princess lost power, then Fan Xian's faction would become the one with the most weight in court. Thus, Hu the scholar reminded the emperor. The emperor slowly said, the matter was indeed all investigated by Fan Xian, but this young man would not use such petty tricks as framing someone. The assassin's confessions and the Jiaozhou Navy general's signatures are all there. The account books are also there. The Ming family's confessions have all come out. There is no need to be suspicious. Hu the scholar saw that the emperor did not listen to his secret advice. He knew that the emperor must have other plans in his heart, so he returned to silence. Fortunately, Yan Bingyun did not die. The emperor suddenly opened his eyes and coldly said, otherwise, how could I face the people of the Qing kingdom? Regardless of whether it is the soldiers in the army or the secret agents of the Overwatch Council, they are all good men who have risked their lives for the Qing kingdom. Yet, they were all sold out by the nobility for their own selfishness. Sold out. His voice rose and he said with disgust, disgusting. There was silence in the royal study. After a long time, the emperor tiredly said, but, after all, Yunrui is my sister. If you all have any resentment, feel free to explode at me. After these words were said, all of the officials in the royal study knelt in unison on the ground and repeatedly said they did not dare. They all felt it was very strange. What kind of status did the eldest princess have? Who would dare to force the emperor to use Qing law to sentence her to death? However, wouldn't it be better for these things to be handled in the palace? Why did the emperor have to tell them so openly, explode. God, where did the emperor get these words from? To prevent the people from discussing, the eldest Princess Li Yunrui's title and fiefdom will not be removed, the emperor suddenly said. Ren Xiaofan. The official of Taichung Temple, Ren Xiaofan, who was kneeling at the back, quickly moved a few steps forward. His legs were shaking, and his heart was beating like a drum. Originally, the royal study meeting had nothing to do with him. Earlier, he had been suspicious and afraid. Only now did he understand that the emperor wanted him to accept the edict. Taichung Temple managed the daily lives of the members of the royal family and all palace etiquette. I am here. The eldest princess has occasionally caught a cold. She has entered the side courtyard of the royal family in the west of the city to rest. Unless there is an edict, no one is to disturb her. She will be watched by the Overwatch Council. The emperor paused and then slowly closed his eyes. Tiredly, he said, when the great river's dikes have been completely repaired, that is when she can come out. Chapter 506. My apologies, I will write less these days. I am truly sorry. There is something wrong with my mental state, and I keep feeling my heart palpitate. I don't know why. It should be a mental problem, not a physical problem. I wish everyone a happy weekend. There was a fire in the imperial palace. Although it was raining heavily that day, and the fire came out of nowhere, intentionally or unintentionally, the crown prince's tutors and others all saw the crown prince, who had been frightened and was not very willing to speak. Thus, in the following days, the crown prince did not listen in at the side of the royal study. There was a good reason. Not many people would suspect that there was something fishy hidden in it. The royal courtyard was where Lin Wan had prepared to get married and moved out of the royal palace to live. It was also where Fan Xian had climbed the wall countless times. However, if he wanted to climb it again, he would certainly be shot into a hedgehog by countless crossbow arrows. The defense around the courtyard was tight. The 4 streets along the courtyard had long been sealed off. It was like a large square. The courtyard was the small circle inside, and the outside was the Overwatch Council's tight blockade. Nominally, it was the eldest princess who was recuperating in that small circle, but the officials in court knew that this princess was imprisoned here by the emperor. The Overwatch Council watched her very closely. Not even a mosquito could fly in, so news could not come out. How long would she be imprisoned for? A carriage, accompanied by guards, slowly approached from the east. The owner of this carriage had entered the palace earlier but had not received any news. Thus, he was taking a great risk and coming to the royal courtyard in the west of the city. The driver was Teng Zijing. This carriage, with the Fan family's square and circle insignia, was coldly stopped half a street from the courtyard. The curtain was lifted slightly, revealing Lin Wan's tired and slightly sorrowful face. She had entered the palace to see the Empress Dowager but did not see the Empress. Although the Empress Dowager did not say anything, the atmosphere in the palace and the strangeness of certain details had already confirmed the suspicions in her heart. Regardless of whether it was from Fan Xian's point of view or the royal family's point of view, she should not have come to the courtyard today, even though it was her mother who was imprisoned inside. She could not help but come. She had a very inauspicious feeling that if she did not see that woman again, she would probably never have the opportunity to see her again in this life. How many years? Madam, the edict is clear. No one is allowed to disturb His Highness's rest, an official of the Overwatch Council said calmly. Why don't you go ask for an edict? After a few rounds of negotiations, Fan Manor's carriage still could not go any further. Lin Wan sighed and returned to the carriage. She knew that she should not have come, but she shook her head and said, I understand. The Overwatch Council official let out a sigh of relief and quickly bowed to express his thanks. If it had been any other official or noble who wanted to come to the courtyard to see the eldest princess, the people of the Overwatch Council would have long taken sticks and chased them out. However, the woman in the carriage was the eldest princess' own daughter. Most importantly, she was the wife of the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, Fan Xian. This latter identity made it so that no one in the Overwatch Council dared to be the slightest bit rude. Lin Wan didn't seem to hear what he was saying. She stared blankly at the familiar garden in the distance and slowly lowered her head. Tears flowed uncontrollably from her eyes as she silently prayed for her mother. The fact that the eldest princess had been placed under house arrest naturally caused a great shock in the court. No one would underestimate the secret influence this woman had over the Qin court politics during these dozen years, as well as the control she and the people around her had over the court. Since the eldest princess had not died, no one knew what would happen in the future. Fortunately, the emperor had swiftly and decisively cleaned out the eldest princess faction and perfectly displayed an emperor's terrifying control and killing power. Not many people were worried that there would be any major changes in court politics. Some factions felt happy from the depths of their hearts, such as the Overwatch Council, the Hall of Governmental Affairs, and Taichung Temple. Many people felt afraid. They didn't know when they would be invited to the Overwatch Council for tea. Many people felt excited. They felt that it was not a waste of their lives to be able to see the emperor and princess, brother and sister, fall out with each other. There were also some people who felt sad and hurt. Sad and hurt for different reasons. For example, Lin Wan was sad because of her mother-daughter relationship. For others, it was because they had lost many opportunities to climb higher. However, everyone had a common understanding. Of all the factions, it should be the second prince who was the most terrified and sad. Fan Xian had used 2 years to bring the connection between the eldest princess and the second prince to the surface and beat the second prince's faction into a frenzy. Everyone knew that the second prince's true support was the eldest princess. Now that the eldest princess had lost power and been placed under house arrest, what would the second prince do? Not many people knew the relationship between the eldest princess and the crown prince, including the second prince. Thus, in the manner, the second prince was just as everyone guessed. He was shocked, sad, disappointed, hurt, and terrified. He crouched on the chair and unconsciously held a piece of pastry in his hand. He didn't send it into his mouth. His fingers tightened and squeezed the pastry loosely. His eyes unconsciously looked at the manor's front door. It seemed that at any moment, the eunuchs in the palace and officials of Taichung Temple would charge into the manor and capture him to house arrest. No matter what, the second prince could not understand why his father would suddenly attack his aunt. Furthermore, he was even more shocked by his father's silent attack and thunderous power. It was not until this moment that he finally understood that just because the emperor had not moved didn't mean he didn't have the power to move. It was just that he had been too lazy to move before. When the emperor moved, heaven and earth changed color. Silently, after a thunderstorm, the situation in Jingdou changed. The second prince didn't know what he was about to face. The emperor was very clear about his relationship with the eldest princess. Perhaps he would never have a chance to rise again in this life. He sighed and placed the pastry on the plate beside him. With a pained smile, he accepted the handkerchief and wiped his hands. Gazing at Wang Fei Yiling, beside him, he said, "If there are any problems, presumably, for the sake of your great-uncle, father won't make things difficult for you." There was a faint layer of worry in Yiling's bright eyes. She knew why her husband had been obediently staying in the manor these few days, constantly preparing to be captured. However, she couldn't comfort him, nor could she do anything to help him. The power in the second prince's hands that he could rely on was the Yi family. In the days after the eldest princess was imprisoned, he didn't have any open or secret communication with the Yi family. He knew that each and every one of his actions was being watched by the palace. He was not prepared. More accurately, after his aunt was suddenly beaten into the dust, he didn't have the courage to do anything. He was worried that his strange actions would make his father even angrier. For the sake of his own life, it was better to be quiet. Imprisonment, at least, was not death. The second prince obediently waited for the arrival of the end in his manor. The people of Jingdo, up and down the court, were also waiting for the day the second prince was finished. Everyone waited for a long time, but there was still no edict from the royal palace. This reality inevitably made everyone feel puzzled and endlessly speculate. At this moment, an edict came out of the palace. Everyone was so shocked that they couldn't say a word. The news reached the manor. The second prince was so shaken by this edict that he fell straight off his chair. Boundless unexpected joy and boundless puzzlement turned into boundless shock in his mind. Why was this? The edict was written very clearly. The king of Nanzhao had just passed away. The emperor had specially ordered the crown prince, Li Chengqian, to go out on a tour on behalf of the emperor and to seal Nanzhao. Nanzhao? This was a vassal country that had been forcefully taken down by the Qing army 7 years ago. Its location was remote, there was a lot of poisonous miasma, and the roads were difficult to traverse. It was thousands of li away. A round trip would take at least 4 months. Although Nanzhao had been peaceful these years and saw the Qing kingdom as its master, the two countries had a close relationship. When the king of Nanzhao passed away, the Qing kingdom had to send a person of considerable status to mourn and attend the ceremony. But, why the crown prince? This was completely against common etiquette. Why not the great prince? Why not Hu the scholar? Why not Fan Xian? At such a sensitive time, the crown prince was suddenly sent thousands of li away to Nanzhao. What did this mean? Could it be a form of exile? The eldest princess had been placed under house arrest. Everyone had thought that the second unlucky person would be the second prince. No one had expected it to be the crown prince. Did the emperor finally have the thought of dethroning the crown prince? Although the details of the current situation were not enough to support this judgment, the crafty officials in court all sensed that there was something strange in the wind. However, they could not understand it. The second prince himself was the person who could not understand it the most. He only felt a chill run through his entire body. His father's actions were always so unexpected and chilling. The way he did things was like flowing clouds in the sky. No matter how hard he tried, he could not figure out the traces. After the second prince's shock, he became even more well-behaved. Chapter 507. In the Jiangnan region far from Jingdo, the feeling of spring had already enveloped the willows of West Lake. By the side of West Lake, the color of spring was even stronger in the Peng family manor. A row of green trees along the back of the manor happily stretched their wastes, greedily sucking in the moisture in the air and the sunlight that warmed day by day. However, the owner of the manor was not very happy, nor did he have the leisure to stretch. With a bitter expression, he read through the council bulletins and court bulletins that Tianjing had recently sent over and even the flowery newspaper the palace did. He still did not relax. In the end, he quietly discussed the news from Baoyue Brothel's channels with Shi Chanli and finally confirmed the path of development of the matter. It was just as the intelligence report said. The eldest princess was under house arrest in the courtyard in the west of the city, and the crown prince had an imperial order to go to Nanzhao kingdom thousands of li away to observe the ceremony. Currently, these were the two most direct results of the matter. Thus, the young owner of the manor couldn't help but sigh and repeatedly shake his head. Shi Chanli looked at him curiously and asked, "Sir, although I don't know why the emperor is angry, after this matter, the eldest princess will no longer be able to harm you in court or in Jiangnan. Is that not a great thing? Why are you still so unhappy?" Fan Xian looked at him with slanted eyes and swallowed his words a moment later. He waved his hand in boredom and said, "We'll talk about it later. You should hurry back to Suzhou and keep an eye on Baoyue Brothel." Shi Chanli left with a head full of confusion. Wang Qinian, who knew the inside story of this matter, flashed in. He stood quietly behind Fan Xian and watched as he once again examined all of the intelligence reports from Jingdo. He did not make a single sound. He didn't make a single sound because he knew why Fan Xian was troubled. I worked so hard to set up such a trap, yet in the end, this is the result, Fan Xian said somewhat helplessly. Fan Xian said somewhat helplessly, the danger this time was great. In the end, that woman still survived. Why exactly is this so? Wang Qinian glanced at him from the side and thought, after all, the eldest princess was his mother-in-law, so her words were inevitably a bit cold-blooded. To be able to stand between the eldest princess and the emperor and suppress the bomb that Fan Xian had used so much strength to detonate, it could only be that old man who had been deep in the palace for a long time. However, Fan Xian still had many questions and doubts about the process of this matter. Soft-hearted. He furrowed his brows as he spoke. These words were not only criticizing the emperor for holding back in the end, but they also represented his suspicions in a certain aspect. Why had the eldest princess not even made a decent counterattack before being so easily taken care of by the emperor? Even if he knew that the actions outside the palace were personally arranged by Director Chen, based on his understanding of his mother-in-law, for her to quietly allow herself to be captured, it really did not match her reputation as a madwoman. I told you, the eldest princess likes the emperor, Fan said. Fan Xian pursed his lips and said, I just didn't think she would be infatuated to such an extent. Before the emperor truly acted and had the intention to kill, she actually wouldn't actively resist. What kind of world is this? No. Fan had Fan. Fan. And Fan, of Fan. He. With of Fan in. He. Fan, he, of Fan said. Of, Fan of Fan, and said. And of Fan, of, he. No matter how arrogant or rebellious one was, no one dared to say such treasonous things in their own yard. Yet, Fan Xian had said it and said it in front of him, forcing him to listen. Wang Qinian coughed unhappily. He knew that his life, death, wealth, and honor in this life had long been tightly tied to Sir Fan Jr. Sir Fan Jr. was not worried at all that he would betray him, which was why he had spoken so impudently in front of him. The plan to expose the scandal of the royal family and force the emperor to take action had been made by Fan Xian and Wang Qinian. This was an important matter. The other members of the Qinian unit had not received a hint of it. As for Yan Bingyun, he was completely in the dark. Fortunately, Jiangnan was far from Jingdo. Fan Xian and Wang Qinian's plan only burst forth 2 months later. Even an immortal would not be able to guess that this matter had something to do with the two of them. Unless Hongzhu suddenly had the courage to kill himself and his friend. There are a few places in the council report that are worth paying attention to. Although he had done something disloyal, Wang Qinian was still not used to talking about disloyal subjects. He pointed painfully at a few places in the council report and forcefully changed the topic. He reminded, the arson case in Huichun Hall, the fall of a relative, and the sudden death of a royal doctor, there is something fishy about these 3 matters. Oh? Fan Xian turned his head and glanced at him. The council report did not connect these 3 matters. The palace would also not allow anyone with intentions to see the connection. The problem was that the two of them knew these 3 places too well. They knew the root of these matters. Do you not think that the eldest princess and crown prince killed to silence them? That is only medicine. Medicine cannot be considered evidence at all. The wrinkles on Wang Qinian's forehead were very deep. The eldest princess and crown prince are not stupid. Why would they do such foolish things during an investigation in the palace? This is also what I find strange. We kept these people alive for the emperor to interrogate. Fan Xian seemed to be deep in thought. But, it is clear that the emperor did not interrogate them. How could he determine that matter? Also, he pointed at the paper and said seriously. The palace didn't find anything. The eldest princess probably won't take the blame. These 3 cases, who did it? Fan Xian furrowed his brows. Thinking about it now, it was indeed better for the third bureau to be dead than alive. His original plan did indeed have some problems in this segment. Now, what he was thinking about was who had helped turn this situation into a complete dead end, leaving the emperor with no way to investigate and only able to rely on his own suspicions to make the final decision. When they were still in Jingdo, he and Wang Qinian had faintly sensed that there was a power that seemed to be doing something similar to what they were doing. However, at the time, they were afraid of alerting the enemy and did not investigate closely. It shouldn't be anyone else. Wang Qinian sighed. Fan Xian also sighed and shook his head. Other than the one of us, there is no one else. The crown prince has gone to Nanzhao. The study did not remain calm for long. Fan Xian spoke of the question lingering in his heart. Based on the time, he should have already passed Yingzhou and continued south. Why do you think the emperor made this arrangement? The officials in the court must still be guessing, not understanding why the crown prince would be implicated in the matter of the eldest princess, but you and I are certain that His Majesty will not tolerate a son who shamed the royal family to inherit the throne. Going to Nanzhao to attend the ceremony, will Qingqian be able to come back? Wang Qinian was silent, not daring to answer this question. Fan Xian smiled and glanced at him. You and I have done who knows how many things that implicate the 9 clans. There is no harm in discussing it. Wang Qinian forced a smile. He knew that Fan Xian was once again reminding him of how shameless his intentions were. He shook his head and said, I don't think anything will happen along the way. Even if the emperor has the intention of deposing the heir, he would not choose this time to throw it out. That makes sense. Fan Xian gently slapped the table. My thoughts are the same as mine. Our emperor wants to be wise and powerful, to leave his name in the annals of history. He has done everything he can to suppress this matter and does not want it to become a laughing stock. The crown prince's trip to Nanzhao this time is to get him out of Jingdo and slowly plan the deposing of the heir. The second reason is. He furrowed his brows and suddenly thought of the poisonous fog that pervaded Nanzhao. 7 or 8 years ago, when Yan Xiaoyi led the army to conquer the south, the casualties of the soldiers were all because of this scourge. The miasma has invaded the body, the crown prince's body is gradually weakening. Wang Qinian said this and suddenly realized that he was indeed becoming more and more daring. Fan Xian forced a smile and continued, if it really is what you and I think, the emperor is indeed powerful. A complicated expression flashed through his eyes, but Wang Qinian did not notice it. Regretfully, it was not completely successful. Fan Xian sighed. Why do you think the eldest princess did not die? This was the second time today that he had openly expressed regret. Wang Qinian felt it was strange. The eldest princess had already lost power. After all, he was her son-in-law. Regardless of whether it was from the perspective of human relations, he should not have said such things. Wang Qinian didn't know that ever since Fan Xian entered Jingdo, he had unconsciously feared the eldest princess. When dealing with other people, he could use schemes and power to compete. However, when dealing with a powerful figure praised by the world as crazy, it was difficult for Fan Xian to guess what kind of crazy reaction she would have. This kind of uncertainty gave Fan Xian a headache. Particularly with the change in the Jingdo palace, Fan Xian still found it difficult to believe such an ending. The eldest princess was on the brink of death, so why did her powers not carry out a final counterattack? What about the elders of the military? What about Yan Xiaoyi's attitude? If the matter had happened too quickly and the military did not have time to react, then what about Yi Luyun? Fan Xian knew better than anyone about Yi Luyun's position in the Juanshan conference. In Suzhou, he had also been scared out of his wits by that broken-down sword. Even if the Juanshang conference was a loose organization, the eldest princess would certainly not be as weak as it seemed now. Earlier, he had analyzed the eldest princess's crazy and abnormal love for the emperor with Wang Qinian. That was just an excuse Wang Qinian used to convince himself. He did not believe it. However, there were some things in this world that perhaps people did not believe were the truest reasons. Fan Xian sat by the desk and sighed regretfully. After Wang Qinian left, he still couldn't stop sighing. Wang Qinian closed the door and unconsciously shook his head. He thought to himself that although the eldest princess had not died, from now on, no one in court would be a match for Commissioner Fan. This kind of result was already very good, so why did the commissioner sigh? In reality, the reason was very simple. Fan Xian was not a loyal official, nor was he a pure official. What he imagined was just watching the tigers and cranes fight in Jiangnan and each get hurt. He wanted the eldest princess to fall from power, but he also did not believe the emperor. What he sighed was that the emperor's methods seemed to have come faster and more powerful than he had imagined. The emperor's power had not been damaged at all. Fan Xian sat alone in the study and silently analyzed everything that had happened in Jingdou. He faintly felt that perhaps the eldest princess was stubbornly waiting for the emperor's thunderous anger because of her crazy feelings. It was clear that the emperor was holding back. Was it familial love? Fan Xian did not believe this. He flipped open the letters under the council newspaper. After reading them a second time, he thought deeply for a moment and then began to write a reply. The letters came from his home in Jingdou. There was one for his father and one for Wanner. They mainly talked about Cici and the child in her stomach. They were all safe and did not need to worry too much. However, Wanner's letter mentioned the eldest princess matter. Although she did not explicitly say anything, it seemed that she wanted Fan Xian to say something in the palace. Fan Xian once again sighed in distress. He knew that his wife was a rare intelligent person. She knew how irreconcilable everything was behind the cover-up. However, she still wrote a letter for him to say something. This only proved that Wanner still had a mother-daughter relationship with the eldest princess. This was a very natural thing. The emperor was cold-blooded. Fan Xian was cold-blooded. It did not mean that everyone in the royal family was cold-blooded. Fan Xian wrote his reply seriously. To his father, he had to express his shock and confusion. To Wanner, his reply was mainly to comfort her. At the same time, he asked about Cici. Following this, he began to write a memorial, a secret memorial to the emperor. Although he did not directly plead for leniency for the eldest princess, he faintly expressed the concern that a son should have. After he finished writing, he looked it over carefully a few times and confirmed that this kind of attitude would not make the emperor think he was hypocritical or make the emperor angry. He sealed it with wax and had his subordinates send it through the first-class mail route. After doing all this, only then did Fan Xian relax slightly. Although he had been free and unfettered in Jiangnan these few months, his gaze had always been fixed on Jingdou. The mental pressure was great. Although the matter was not coordinated, it was basically proceeding according to his plans. He finally relaxed a little. Pulling open a drawer in the secret room, he took out the process of the 3 workshops of the palace treasury that 7th Yi and he had spent more than a year copying out and spaced out. Although this process was not everything in the palace treasury, Fan Xian knew that if this thing actually made its way to northern Qi, it would have terrifying consequences. He narrowed his eyes and thought to himself that although he and Chen Pingping had unconsciously worked together to play the emperor once, in the end, they had only played around with the details. As for the larger picture, perhaps it was the emperor playing with him. 13th Wang has been idle for too long, Fan Xian thought. Fan Xian thought of this. He then got up, packed everything, and left the manor by West Lake. Chapter 508. I've been having heart palpitations lately, and it's hard for me to concentrate on writing. Please forgive me. I'll take a day off next week to comfort myself. Thank you. As for the book review section, I don't mind criticism, really. Of course, it's up to you whether you agree or not. Regardless of whether you are a debater or a debater, you can say whatever you want, but can't you be a little more gentle? Please try your best to maintain the peace in the book review section. Sorry to trouble everyone, please. It was right next to the West Lake in Hangzhou. It was almost dusk. The scenery of the lake and the mountains blended into the golden light. It was indescribably beautiful. In this patch of dusk, Fan Xian, alone, came to the top of a hill by the lake. Looking at the young man holding the green banner, he tilted his head and said, "I heard you've been telling fortunes in Hangzhou recently and have received the favor of a few young ladies of large families?" The young man holding the green banner was the last disciple of Sigu Jian in Dongyi, the 9th-level ace who had helped Fan Xian kill Yan Shendu. Fan Xian had always felt that the existence of this person, as well as his subsequent assistance to him, was somewhat absurd. It was like one of those avant-garde dramas he had heard of in his previous life. No matter how he savored it, it left a strange taste in his mouth. Although Sigu Jian, that idiot, seemed to have thought things through clearly, Fan Xian still felt that this matter was too ridiculous. Although not many people in the world knew of the relationship between 13th Wang and Sigu Jian, if Fan Xian turned hostile and denied it, how would Sigu Jian explain it to the eldest princess or Yan Xiaoyi? 13th Wang's face was facing the direction of West Lake. The faint golden light reflected off his handsome face, plating it with a comforting glow. It was very warm. "Now, the entire Jiangnan knows that I'm an expert under your command." The young man smiled amiably and said, "Naturally, the officials will also give me some face. This fortune-telling business is definitely not bad." A light breeze blew across the surface of the lake and moved up the trees at the foot of the hill. It only slightly moved a corner of the green banner in 13th Wang's hand. It just happened to reveal the words, "Iron Minister." After experiencing the storm of Zhaoshang Money House taking over the Ming family's shares, the people who had been in Ming Garden at the time had already guessed that the young man standing behind the shopkeeper of Zhaoshang Money House was an Xiaofan Jr. had used to monitor the money house. The trusted aide of the imperial envoy was naturally doing very well in the Jiangnan area. "Fortunately, you don't have the habit of harming innocent girls." Fan Xian smiled and stood beside him. Tilting his head to glance at him, a complicated emotion rose in his heart. On the green hill by the lake, the surface of the lake reflected golden light, and the smooth face. This scene made Fan Xian involuntarily think of many years ago on the cliff in Danzhou. The man closest to him in the world seemed to also be surrounded by a ball of light. The man with the black cloth seemed to be saying goodbye to a certain place. What about 13th Wang? Fan Xian unconsciously shook his head. He didn't understand why he was used to associating this friend with the blind uncle. He missed Wu Zhu very much, particularly in such a peaceful situation in Jiangnan. He didn't know if Uncle Wu Zhu's injury had recovered or not. Even Chen Pingping didn't know where Wu Zhu was hiding to recover. What kind of injury would take more than a year to recover from? Fan Xian furrowed his brows. 13th Wang glanced at him curiously and asked, "Sir Fan, is there something on your mind?" "Yes." Fan Xian did not hesitate and said straightforwardly, "I have something I need your help with." "What is it?" "The Crown Prince is heading in the direction of Nanzhao. The road is shrouded in poisonous fog, and the path is dangerous. I am worried about his body," Fan Xian said with a calm expression. 13th Wang furrowed his brows slightly. His breathing became slightly heavier. After thinking for a long time, he slowly said, "The Imperial Army, the Overwatch Council, and the Qing Kingdom's Tiger Guards. This kind of defense is very tight. Even if I die, I might not be able to get close to his body. Fan Xian smiled. You misunderstand what I mean. 13th Wang looked at him and didn't say anything. Help me bring an antidote pill to him. Fan Xian lowered his head slightly as if he was avoiding the thickening golden light on the surface of the lake. Help me protect him in secret and ensure his safety along the way. 13th Wang's brows furrowed even tighter. He had no idea why Fan Xian would suddenly give him this mission. After hesitating for a moment, he quietly said, "Why? Given my understanding of the situation in Jingdo, the eldest princess is under house arrest, and it is clear that the crown prince is about to lose power. Under the Qing emperor, there is no one who can stand against you." Fan Xian smiled. He didn't know how to explain, so he decided not to explain. What exactly happened in Jingdo? 13th Wang asked curiously like a child. This matter wouldn't have anything to do with you, would it? He unconsciously used the honorific, you. Fan Xian spat and said without good humor, I'm in Jiangnan. No matter how long my hands are, they can't reach Jingdo. 13th Wang thought for a bit and agreed with this explanation. He scratched his head and said, but, the crown prince is heading all the way south. It looks like your emperor has some thoughts. Sir Fan, you want me to protect him. Have you guessed something? But, if I guessed correctly, by doing this, aren't you opposing the emperor of your country? Presently, I have long become a secret that everyone knows. To openly oppose your emperor like this, are you not worried? Forget it, don't guess blindly. Fan Xian sighed. This matter has nothing to do with the emperor. It is purely a request from Wanner's letter. After all, I am half a member of the royal family, so I have to pay a price. 13th Wang smiled. He knew that what he said was a lie, but he didn't expose it. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and glanced at him. Don't laugh like a rabbit. Looking at it now, you're not an idiot either. 13th Wang spread out his hands and said, when have I ever been an idiot? When you killed the little archer. Fan Xian had long learned from 13th Wang about the specifics of the night attack on Yuantai camp. He knew of 13th Wang's bravery that day and had let out countless sighs of admiration. Now, he repeated it again. Brave warriors, die very easily. 13th Wang smiled self-mockingly. I'm probably only used to this kind of battle style. For some reason, Fan Xian suddenly thought of Lin Qingxia's role as the valiant general. Absurdly, he laughed to himself. Then, under 13th Wang's confused gaze, he gently patted his shoulder. Your teacher wants you to follow me, presumably for something many years in the future. Since it is so, it is best if you value your life more. On the Nanzhao line, just follow in secret. It would be best if you don't have to fight. He was silent for a moment and then said, I'm not threatening you. However, the Ming family is now in my hands. The power to the east road of the palace treasury is also in my hands. You should know that during these 2 months, my cooperation with your teacher has been good, so please help me with this small favor. Watching the green banner disappear into the golden willows by the lakeside, Fan Xian fell silent. He crouched down and sat down on the green hill. He looked at the beautiful West Lake and the broken bridge that did not exist and had never existed in a daze. If Wang Qinian, who knew the inside story, knew of his plans, he would certainly be scared half to death and think he had lost his mind. However, Fan Xian knew he was not crazy. In the past, he wanted to bring down the crown prince because if the crown prince succeeded, he would not have good days. To protect the crown prince's life now, he had to create trouble for the Qing emperor. Once the eldest princess and the crown prince completely died, there would be no buffer between him and the emperor. A reduction in power would immediately come. Fan Xian was more worried about the safety of Chen Pingping and Fan Jian. Fan Xian knew that the Qing emperor was a person who cared a lot about his reputation. From the incident in the royal palace, it was evident that the emperor had killed hundreds of people in the palace in order to cover up a scandal of the royal family. He had also tossed out the long-suppressed island massacre in the East Sea and the details of betraying Yan Bingyun. Thus, the eldest princess' downfall had a solid reason. However, the emperor had gone around in circles. It meant that he did not want his reputation to suffer any damage. This was not a scandal of the royal family. It was a scandal of the eldest princess. That was all. The arrangements regarding the crown prince also made this clear. Presumably, the emperor was having a headache over how to depose the heir. He did not want to slap himself in the face. The crown prince had behaved innocently and peacefully these 2 years. What excuse could the emperor find? Many things would certainly happen on the trip to Nanzhao. Fan Xian had sent 13th Wang, a variable, to digest a portion of those things. Fan Xian was not stupid enough to protect the crown prince again. He just wanted to create some trouble for the emperor so that he would not notice him, Zhaoshang Money House, or the 2 elders behind him so early. He missed Uncle Wu Zhu. He knew that there were many people he cared about in the Qing kingdom. For these people, he had to stay here. If it was just Fan Xian alone, he would not be afraid or worried about anything. Even if he broke off relations with the emperor, he could still be arrogant and pretentiously raise his middle finger at the royal palace. In the eyes of the second prince and many clever people, everything around Fan Xian was actually power on paper and would not be able to withstand a single blow. He knew that the people of this world all had a natural worship toward imperial power. Putting aside the Overwatch Council, even his Qinian unit and Sir Yen Jr., who was far away in Jingdo, might stand against him because of an edict. However, even if everything around him was taken away by the emperor's edict, he would not be afraid. He would not be correct. He had the heart of a modern person that had stopped for a long time. He never had a sliver of fear toward things like imperial power. He had the ability to consult with Seventh Yi and organize a set of palace treasury processes. He was himself a 9th-level ace skilled in killing people. He still had the chest, the 419 Emperor's lover, and Uncle Wu Zhu. Fan Xian sat silently on the green hill beside West Lake and narrowed his eyes at the red sunset clouds in the distance. He thought to himself, if one day he was forced to raise his middle finger at the royal palace, what a spectacular scene it would be. The kingdom of Qing was the most powerful nation in the world. The eldest princess, Li Yunrui, had hidden behind the Qing emperor and done many things in the past decade. She had secretly obtained countless benefits from the other 2 great powers. For example, she had used the murder of Assistant Minister Fan's illegitimate son by assassins from northern Qi and Dongyi to start a war again, seizing a large portion of northern Qi's territory. She had also backhandedly sold Yan Bingyun to northern Qi in exchange for Xiaofan's return to the north. This had thrown the northern Qi court into chaos, and the factions of the emperor and empress had once again clashed. Miraculously, the eldest princess, the Empress Dowager of Northern Qi, and Sigurjian of Dongyi had always maintained a good relationship. There was even a lot of cooperation regarding the palace treasury. He didn't know what those foreigners were thinking. No matter how they thought about it, the eldest princess's sudden imprisonment brought a violent shock to many places in the world. It made many people begin to think of useless things, such as Fan Xian beginning to shift his strategic focus to the Son of Heaven. In northern Qi and Dongyi, the lofty people would also give their own judgments. The great Grand Master in Dongyi had sent the last disciple he was most proud of to Fan Xian's side. He didn't know that this last disciple had been sent by Fan Xian to be a bodyguard. Of course, he didn't care about this right now. He was only concerned about the eldest princess' imprisonment. The air of spring was thick. The air of spring was thick, but Dongyi, located by the sea, was filled with a salty and wet smell. The warm currents and wind on the sea blew gently all year round, so the people in the city did not feel much gratitude toward this air of spring. In the center of Dongyi was the manor of the master of the city. It took up a large amount of land. The master of the city was responsible for all the specific business in the city. In this large and prosperous city, the so-called government affairs were actually business affairs. Problems with public security rarely appeared because there were no great bandits who dared to make a move in a place with the most ninth-level aces in the world. Other than the young Wang Qinian. Everyone knew that the place that truly guided Dongyi forward and decided its survival was not in the manor of the master of the city. Instead, it was in the stretch of grass huts outside the city. The grass huts formed a concave shape. Strangely, the opening did not face the main road. On the contrary, it was against the large mountain in the back. If someone wanted to enter the grass huts, they would need to go around to the back of the mountain and follow the mountain path down. According to legend, this was the easiest way for Sigu Jian to test visitors. In the center of the concave grass huts was a large pit. The pit was filled with the swords left behind by the aces who had come to challenge Sigu Jian and ask for his guidance. Like a chaotic forest, they pierced toward the sky. It was not easy to become a great grandmaster who had just emerged. Fortunately, the trend of this challenge finally ended after the large pit gradually filled up. No one would be stupid enough to challenge Sigu Jian again. As for those who were that stupid, they had already died in the grass huts. This was the holy land that all martial artists worshipped, revered, and yearned for in their hearts, the Sword Hut. Some people also called it the Sword Grave. It was a beautiful name with a high realm. However, Sigu Jian would only use one name to describe the holy land beside his residence, the Sword Pit. "This is a pit," a mocking voice rang out from the grass hut. The owner of the voice seemed to be very young. The Qing Emperor, that bastard, and Li Yunrui, that crazy woman, do they really think I am an idiot? Chapter 509. Ingxiu's classmate confirms he is safe. Thank you, thank you. The voice in the grass hut was full of mockery and an almost arrogant sense of arrogance. It viciously criticized the high and mighty brother and sister of the Qing kingdom and said, "House arrest." Only an idiot would believe it. The two of them, one a god and the other a ghost, have been together for a dozen years. How could they suddenly turn against each other? If they turn against each other, they have to find a reason. Do the reasons the Qing court has thrown out now count as reasons? Yun Zhilan's knees hurt a little. He knew that his teacher was talking happily and had clearly forgotten he was still kneeling. He rubbed his knees and climbed up. His face was full of a bitter smile. He thought to himself that most of the time, his teacher's life appeared absurd, but he always had an admirable patience when it came to the big picture. In some small details, he also had a stroke of genius, such as his little brother disciple. However, his teacher's words had clearly become absurd again. Did he think that the major event that had happened in Jingdo was purely the Qing emperor and eldest princess who had nothing better to do and were willing to lose the face of the royal family to put on a show for the world to see? No matter what, Yun Zhilan would not believe this. He said a few words to express his opinion. The great grandmaster in the sword hut fell silent. It was as if he felt that there was indeed something wrong with his judgment. In his heart, the Qing people, particularly the Qing royal family, were, without question, the dirtiest, most shameless, filthiest, lowliest, and black-bellied creatures in the world. It was not an easy matter for him to believe that such a large crack had appeared in the Qing royal family. He unconsciously thought that the Qing kingdom was preparing to make him a scapegoat again. This thought made him angry and sad. Thus, he was unable to listen to Yun Zhilan's words. As the leading disciple of Sigu Jian of Dongyi, other than the 2 times he had been invited by the eldest princess to the Qing kingdom without success, Yun Zhilan represented his teachers well the rest of the time. He cooperated with the master of Dongyi and maintained the peace of this city and the surrounding small countries. When it came to government affairs, he was much more astute than the great grandmaster known to the world as an idiot. Ever since the incident in Jingdo, he had acutely sensed that there seemed to be an opportunity in front of Dongyi. If they could grasp this opportunity, Dongyi's greatest threat could be eliminated. They would no longer have to be like a tree sitting on the fence, sacrificing themselves between the nobles of the Qin kingdom. In particular, the fact that the eldest princess was not dead made Yun Jilan even more certain of his judgment, and he very sincerely repeated it to his master. The grass hut once again fell silent. Sigurd didn't speak again. He was silent. After a long time, the voice slowly said, "We cannot interfere right now. Who knows if it is a trap?" Yun Jilan expressed that he understood, but he was smiling bitterly in his heart. He didn't understand that the great swordsman in the hut, that idiotic grandmaster, was not only afraid of the Qin kingdom's evilness. More importantly, if Dongyi wanted to use the Qin kingdom's internal strife, they needed a good opportunity. As the most powerful country in the world, this kind of opportunity could not be created by outsiders. They could only wait for the people inside the Qin kingdom to send out an invitation. Regardless of whether it was Sigurd or Ku He, they were both towering trees outside of the Qin kingdom. These two trees could not easily express their attitudes or dance with the wind in the mountains. Once they went in one direction, it would not be easy to come back. Continue to watch and see what the Qin people are playing. The voice in the grass hut rang out again, giving an order to Yun Jilan. However, he didn't tell his disciple. For a long time, certain people in the Qin kingdom had been able to pass on important information to him through certain channels. Now, he was weighing this information. "Yes, teacher." Yun Jilan prepared to go to the manor of the master of the city to discuss when he suddenly thought of something. Turning around, he furrowed his brows and said, "The eldest princess of the Qin kingdom has already lost power. Fan Xian should be safe. In order to prevent anyone from discovering his identity, should we summon him back?" The last disciple of Dongyi's Sigurd 13th Wang, who held the green banner, had always been a mysterious figure. During these 2 years, many people, including Yun Jilan, only knew that his teacher loved this young disciple dearly. They had never had the opportunity to enter the hut to see what this young disciple looked like. It was only during the Jiangnan Ming family's competition for merchants that Yun Jilan learned for the first time that his teacher had sent his disciple to Fan Xian's side. Yun Jilan did not understand. More than that, he felt faintly uncomfortable. After all, within the Qin court, the young man surnamed Fan had always been Dongyi's greatest enemy. During these years, he had ruined countless things for Dongyi and killed countless people. Even Yun Jilan himself had almost died to the Overwatch Council's assassination. The aces and assassins of Dongyi had fought guerrilla warfare with the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council in Jiangnan for half a year. Although Yun Jilan accepted his teacher's change in attitude toward Fan Xian, he felt a little conflicted in his heart. "I know what you're thinking," the voice in the grass hut said mockingly. "You still think it's wrong for me to help Fan Xian. Actually, you're wrong. It's not that Fan Xian needs our help, it's that we need Fan Xian to accept our help. Li Yunrui's side is already finished, at least on the palace treasury side. We need Fan Xian. In reality, the Ming family has already been finished these few months, but it has not affected Dongyi. What does this mean? It means that Fan Xian has already accepted our help." Yun Jilan lowered his head slightly and said, "But, in this way, at least 30% of our channels are under Fan Xian's control. This young noble of the Qin kingdom has always turned hostile like flipping a book. Once he becomes ruthless, it will not be easy to deal with. Why would he be moved?" In the grass hut, Sigurd Jian's analysis walked the path of wisdom and was not muddled at all. In the past, the two sides only fought on a small scale and did not touch upon their roots. The reason there was conflict at that time was because of Li Yunrui in the middle. Now that Li Yunrui has been imprisoned, there is no longer any conflict of interest between Fan Xian and me. Why would he take the risk of a complete fallout and be moved? Yunjilan's heart jumped. He understood his teacher's words, between Fan Xian and me. Didn't this mean that his teacher had already, at least on the surface, admitted that Fan Xian, that young man, had the right to sit on equal footing with him? In the past, we could trade with Li Yunrui. Now, we can trade with Fan Xian. The voice in the grass hut rang out again. In the entire Qing court, the only people who do not fear the Qing emperor are these two. Remember, the Qing kingdom is not Fan Xian's. He has no reason to sacrifice his own interests for the benefit of the Qing kingdom. Yunjilan thought about it and still did not understand. If Fan Xian was present, he would certainly give the grass hut a thumbs up and praise the idiot brother-disciple for his high EQ. Before the incident, I had your disciple throw his lot in with Fan Xian. This is the so-called attitude. The voice in the grass hut paused. The attitude has to be in place. So, let your disciple do things himself. Yunjilan furrowed his brows slightly. He thought that mysterious and pitiful disciple had been thrown out by his teacher to work hard for Fan Xian. Was it just to express his attitude toward Dongyi? Of course, I had him go to the Qing kingdom for another reason. Yunjilan's spirit rose. He didn't know what secrets he would hear next. The words that entered his ears startled him. After thinking for a while, he realized that the matter was indeed as it was. There was nothing more important than this matter. When the Northern Qi royal family rebelled, why was that Northern Qi woman able to hold her son and sit firmly on the throne and turn a wailing Northern Qi into what it is today? Because He stood on her side. Why is it that Dongyi and the other countries are sandwiched between the two most powerful countries in the world, wavering left and right, suffering for the best, losing tribute and taking in silver? Why is it that the Qing kingdom's ruler and people are so ambitious, but they have never tried to use their powerful martial power to swallow Dongyi into their stomachs? Yunjilan did not even need to think. With a glimmer of reverence, he said, because Dongyi has you and the sword in your hand. Correct. Although the title of Great Grandmaster is meaningless, it is good to use it to scare people and as a killing weapon. The voice in the grass hut suddenly became lonely. Have you ever thought about what the world would be like if He died and I died? Yunjilan felt a chill run down his back. As for such a scene, it was something that everyone in the world had thought about. However, no one dared to say it aloud. They knew that given the Qing kingdom's powerful military power and the hot-bloodedness of conquering borders rooted in the hearts of the Qing people, once two great grandmasters who did not belong to the Qing kingdom died, the entire world would certainly sink into chaos again. Putting aside Northern Qi, at least Dongyi would find it difficult to keep. He said sincerely and firmly, "Teacher, you will not die." What a joke! Who doesn't die in this world? The voice in the grass hut became more and more lonely. Even if I don't die, people will grow old. He is already so old, and I am not young either. Do you think that an old man at the end of his life, when he can't even hold a sword in his trembling hand, is still a great grandmaster? But, what does this have to do with little disciple entering the Qing kingdom? Yunjilan was silent for a moment and then asked the question in his heart. There have never been any great grandmasters in the world, the great grandmaster in the grass hut said coldly. The great grandmaster in the straw hut said coldly, "It's just that since more than 30 years ago, we monsters have gradually appeared. There weren't any in the past, and I don't know if there will be any in the future. But at least for now, among the young experts in the world, there are only a handful of people who have the chance to approach this realm." Yunjilan's heart jumped slightly as he watched the calmly closed door of the grass hut. The voice in the door laughed. "It's a pity that you are old. It is very difficult for this to be possible. Many people have crawled out of the sword pit in Dongyi, including the most 9th-level aces in the world. If you want to talk about who has the opportunity to become a new generation of strange creatures, perhaps only your little disciple is. Yunjilan opened his mouth slightly. He had once met 13th Wang face to face in Suzhou's Zhaoshang money house. At the time, he had learned that this little disciple had already entered the 9th level at such a young age. He had been very shocked, but he had always felt that his little disciple's realm was far from his. How was it that in his teacher's mouth, he was the person most likely to enter the great grandmaster realm? This is a problem of one's nature. Sigu Jian's voice finally became as confident and indifferent as a great grandmaster's. If one desires something to the extreme, one must not care about something. You can't, and the knife-wielding master under Ku he called Lang Tiao also can't. Actually, these years, presumably, Ku he and I have both been troubled by the problem we spoke of earlier. Once we grow old and die, what will happen to the land behind us? Thus, we have to resolve this problem before we die. I chose your little disciple, Ku he. He chose Hai Tang. Coincidentally, they are each other's last disciples. Even more coincidentally, Ku he sent Hai Tang to Fan Xian's side. Sigu Jian's voice carried a glimmer of mockery. Even if it wasn't him who sent her, at least he must be very happy that something happened between Hai Tang and Fan Xian. Since he could send her, I could also send her. However, Hai Tang is a girl. This is a great advantage. Yunjilan was dumbstruck. He had no idea how the great grandmaster's plan to raise Fan Xian was brought up. He didn't understand why Ku he and his teacher, these two great grandmasters, would send their last disciples one by one to Fan Xian's side. Are there really only 4 strange creatures in the world? Sigu Jian asked in a quiet voice. Yes, perhaps there are only 4 strange creatures. That strange creature never seems to age. You should know him, that blind man. Yunjilan's heart grew cold. He knew that his teacher was talking about a mysterious figure who had secretly traveled through Dongyi many years ago. But, you don't know that Fan Xian is that blind man's disciple. The person in the grass hut smiled. Isn't this a very interesting matter? The last disciples of strange creatures should all be together. Fighting and talking will allow the 3 of them to improve greatly. This is the so-called training. Of course, presumably, Ku he is thinking the same as me. He wants his disciple to go to Fan Xian's side to get a bit of good luck. Luck? Yunjilan stared at the tightly closed door of the grass hut. What kind of conditions are needed to become an old strange creature? Intelligence, cleverness, hard work, but, most importantly, luck. Sigu Jian sighed. There are countless cultivators in the world. In the end, only a few people succeed. Is it the heavens being unfair, or is it something else? In reality, it is just that our luck is a bit better than other people's. In the end, he said, what happened 30 years ago was already proven. To become a great grandmaster, one must have this kind of luck. Then, one must try with the blind man. However, no one can find where the blind man is. Since it is so, then one can only try the blind man's last disciple. Yunjilan was confused by these mysterious words. A moment later, he asked the question he was most concerned about. Little brother disciple, Hai Tang, Fan Xian. Teacher, of these 3, who do you think is most likely to succeed? Among these 3 top aces of the younger generation, other than 13th Wang who was still a nobody, Hai Tang and Fan Xian stood, without question, at the peak of their age group. At such an age, they had already entered the 9th level. Each of them had a good teacher. Furthermore, at different times of time, people always thought they were Tianmai. Thus, when people discussed who would be the next great grandmaster, the first thing they thought of was Fan Xian and Hai Tang duo. Hai Tang. Sigu Jian's judgment came very simply. Because she is very good, she is very fast. Then youngest disciple? It is also possible that the clarity of that child's nature is not below Haitang's. What about Fan Xian? The person in the grass hut was silent for a moment. Fan Xian is the least likely. Why? Although he loathed Fan Xian, Yunjilan still unconsciously raised an objection. Although his realm is still lingering around the 9th level and is very unstable, not as good as Haitang Duo, given the speed of his improvement, it is truly inhuman. According to my observations, it is rare to see a young person as determined as him in this world. As for hard work, although he was born into a powerful family, he has cultivated continuously since he was young and has endured hardship. All the conditions are met, but Fan Xian is missing the most important link, Sigurjian concluded. He has no heart. This young man has no heart for this world. Since he has no heart, naturally, there is no nature to speak of. If he wants to enter the realm of the heavenly path, he will have to give up everything in his hands. Is he willing to do that? Fan Xian was a normal person, so he was unwilling. Although the blind man is an extraordinary person and can bring luck to his opponents, his own luck is not very good. Furthermore, he cannot be a good teacher, Sigurjian said in the end. I miss the blind man very much. It is a pity that after disappearing for a dozen years, he came out to find Ku He, that big baldy. Yes, it is a pity. Yunjilan heard the sound of a sword being unsheathed in the hut. Among the great grandmasters, Yi Luyun was a carefree person who never took on disciples. Sigurjian, on the other hand, took on a wide range of disciples. If one included those who were registered, there were at least 50. Thus, the levels of his disciples were mixed. Although there was a 9th level ace like Yunjilan and a mysterious young man like 13th Wang, there were still many who did not make it. As for the Northern Qi imperial advisor Ku He, he didn't take many disciples. Each one of them was a top ace, such as the Northern Qi emperor's martial teacher, the 9th level ace Lang Tiao, and Haitang Duo, who wore flowery clothing and was known as the Tian Mai Being. The blind uncle Wu Zhu also had disciples. However, his first disciple and last disciple were both the same person, Fan Xian. What Sigurjian said was correct. The great grandmasters were also people. They also had to consider the problems behind them. Thus, these strange creatures all put a great deal of effort into their last disciples. Of course, they only did so in secret. They didn't want this pressure to interfere with their disciples' cultivation. Haitang, Fan Xian, and 13th Wang had yet to appear in the same place at the same time. If there was such a day, it would certainly be an interesting sight. Chapter 5:10. I've read all the book reviews, really. I just want to make one thing clear. After all, everyone is reading for leisure. Don't ruin your mood because of the debate. There are many important things in the world. Writing a book is my job. I'll try my best to write it well. Everyone should enjoy reading. The problem now is that everyone is fighting fiercely. I can't even press the add essence button. I'm truly sorry. Presumably, everyone doesn't care about these few essences, so I'll take this opportunity to slack off. P.S. I'm taking a day off on Thursday. Thank you, everyone. Northern Qi spring came a little late, but it would still come. Not far from Shangjing, the capital of Northern Qi, one had to walk around the desolate Topaz West Mountain and then head north for a few hours before coming to a quiet and secluded mountain. This mountain was not very tall, but the tall trees and shrubs on the mountain were densely packed. It appeared particularly primitive and quiet. Layers of light and dark green intermingled. It was very beautiful. Just like the sword hut's position in the hearts of the swordsmen of the world, this green mountain, in the eyes of the Northern Qi people and the ascetic cultivators who traveled the world, was also an inviolable and lofty holy land. This nameless green mountain was the location of northern Qi's Tianyi Dao and the place where imperial advisor Ku He cultivated. Walking along the rugged mountain path toward the quiet and secluded mountain valley, one could faintly see the place where tens of thousands of pine trees gathered. Tens of thousands of pine trees. The shape of the pine needles and the width of the trees were all different. Some of the pine needles were soft and floated down like strands of hair. Some of the pine needles were angry and hard enough to pierce the heavens. Some of the pine needles were like thin and round tubes. They were particularly interesting. It was early morning. Morning dew covered the plants in the mountain. After the dew moistened the pine needles, it slid to the ground. Only the pine trees with dense pine needles would store puddles of crystalline dew in their branches and leaves. Reflecting the morning light, they were as clear as gemstones. Following the faint light of the dew into the mountains, one could see the buildings of Tianyi Taoist school. These buildings inherited the traditional aesthetic style of the Wei Kingdom and northern Qi. They were mainly green and black. Black represented sternness, while green was close to nature. They stood between heaven and earth, their power hidden within their beauty. Although Tianyi Dao's sect did not accept disciples as widely as Dongyi's sword hut, Master Ku He's quiet cultivation attracted countless pilgrims who came to worship him. No matter how few disciples the imperial advisor took, adult disciples such as Lang Tiao still had to take in disciples. After a few decades, the number of people in the sect had gradually increased. Now, there were more than 100 people who spent many years cultivating and studying in Qing Mountain. In the hearts of these disciples, of course, they hoped that they could cultivate in seclusion in the mountains for many years, and then go out to bring prosperity to the world, just like that fairy in their hearts. Back in the day, the northern Qi saint girl, Haitang Duo, had cultivated in seclusion for countless years under these pine trees. Before Haitang Duo left the mountain, she had planted vegetables in a garden on the outskirts of those greenish-black buildings. Other than what she consumed, the rest of the vegetables were sent to the school. To this day, there were still many disciples who felt proud to have eaten the vegetables Haitang had personally grown. During this year, Haitang spent most of her time in the distant Qing kingdom's Jiangnan with the equally famous Xiaofan Jr. This reality made the people of northern Qi angry, particularly the Tianyi Dao students in Qing Mountain. Other than jealousy and anger, what made these students most unhappy was that it was very difficult to see the flower-clothed girl in the garden again. In the past, as long as they saw the girl's figure, everyone's heart would calm down. Not long after Haitang left, another girl moved into the garden. At the same time, she turned the vegetables in the garden into medicinal herbs that could be grown. This girl's identity was not ordinary. She was Ku He's last disciple and had taken Haitang's place. She moved into Haitang's garden and collected her seeds. She was Fan Xian's sister. The quiet cultivating disciples in the mountains were incomparably shocked. They didn't understand why the patriarch would go all the way to the Qing kingdom to take a female disciple. They also didn't understand why he had to take Fan Xian's sister as a disciple. Who was Fan Xian? He was one of the most powerful young officials in the Qing kingdom. However, things had already happened. The disciples in the mountains could not change anything. They could only learn to accept it. After a long time, they became used to the young lady of the Fan family's existence. The Qing kingdom and northern Qi were mortal enemies. Although they had been on an unprecedentedly friendly relationship these 2 years, the emotions rooted in the depths of people's hearts were difficult to remove. Thus, Fan Ruoruo's initial days in Qing Mountain were not very smooth. No matter where she went, she was greeted by hostile gazes and whispered discussions behind her back. Fortunately, this girl did not care at all. Additionally, her personality was cold, so she did not notice other people's attitudes. After a few months, the Tianyi Dao disciples finally realized that this disciple aunt's attitude was even colder than theirs. They couldn't help but find it boring. In reality, Fan Ruoruo was very satisfied with her learning life in northern Qi. There were many more smiles on her face than when she was in Jingdo. However, the northern Qi people did not understand this. After all, they did not know that the young lady of the Fan family had long had the nickname of the talented iceberg girl in the Qing kingdom. Fan Ruoruo's happiness came from the relaxed environment and tense life. Imperial advisor Ku He had only taught her some basic heart of Tianyi Dao and gifted her a few scrolls of scriptures. He did not pay much attention to her. The rest of her time was spent studying medicine with her second disciple. This was one of the reasons she had come to northern Qi. She used the medical skills she had learned to treat the poor people at the foot of the mountain. Her days were very fulfilling. The second disciple's name was Mu Peng. The names Ku He had given his disciples were all very interesting. Lang Tao, Hai Tang, Mu Peng, Bai Shen. They were all names of plants. People were like their names. Lang Tao was like the literal feeling. His entire body was filled with killing intent and sharpness. Hai Tang stood gently and firmly in the wind and rain. Mu Peng was a traditional Chinese medicine. One could imagine what Ruoruo's 40-year-old second disciple was best at. Fan Ruoruo picked up the leaves and collected the dew on the pine leaves beside the courtyard. Tilting her head slightly, she poured the water into the dripping bottle. She was curious. Why did the prescription use dew? She carried Ping out of the courtyard and walked up the stone steps toward the mountain, preparing to carry out her daily studies. Along the way, she saw some young Tianyi Dao disciples. When these disciples saw the girl holding the bottle, they all stood to the side and bowed in greeting. For one, she was their disciple aunt. After a few months, the Tianyi Dao disciples knew that although this young lady of the Fan Manor's personality was cold, her heart was truly kind and did not pretend to be fake. She was much better than the Fan Xian in the south, who was gentle on the outside but vicious on the inside. In particular, this young lady of the Fan Manor had gone down the mountain tirelessly to treat the common people for many months. This made these junior disciples deeply respect her virtue. Fan Ruoruo nodded her head slightly in return. There was no expression on her face. When she climbed up the long stone steps and stood at the top of the mountain, she stopped and looked at the lush green forest at the foot of the mountain. Suddenly, she stretched her waist and let out a loud cry. Her cheeks were flushed red from exercising, and she was a little excited. She had been born with a lack of nutrition since childhood. Although her brother had taken care of her for a while, there was no fundamental improvement. When she was in Jingdo, her face was always pale. Now, a healthy red rose to her face. One could imagine that after living in northern Qi for more than a year, her body was much better. One's constitution came from one's heart. It was mainly because of one's relaxed mood. I don't have to participate in boring poetry gatherings. I don't have to go to the manors of the nobles to chat with the women. I don't have to be like those sisters who hide behind a screen and look at men. I don't have to do needlework every day. Fan Ruoruo gazed in a daze at the mountain below the stone steps. A happy smile rose to her face. This kind of life is what I want. Thank you, brother. Other than the heart of Tianyi Dao cultivation, there was also scripture and righteousness. Basically, they used the curriculum that Master Zhuang Mohan had personally revised. Fan Ruoruo finished her 2 hours of cultivation and came to Mu Peng's room. She bowed respectfully and then asked a few difficult questions in medical skills for her second brother's guidance. Mu Peng said a few words and suddenly saw the joy in the girl's eyes. He smiled slightly and said, "Sir Fan Jr. has written again?" Fan Ruoruo smiled and nodded. "Although it hasn't come yet, counting the days, it should be here." Mu Peng scratched his slightly disheveled hair and smiled. "You are so happy. Presumably, your relationship with your brother and sister is very good. Since it is so, why don't you stay in the Qing kingdom? Although northern Qi is good, it is, after all, a foreign country. Although Mu Peng's status could not compare to the old poison in the Overwatch Council, regardless of whether it was a doctor or a major figure who used poison, his hair seemed to be messy. His daily life was messy, so he did not notice things like dressing up. Fan Ruoruo smiled slightly and replied, "It doesn't matter where." Brother said that in one's life, one must always make some sacrifices for the goal one wants. Mu Peng asked in surprise, "Oh? Then, what is your goal?" "To save people," Fan Ruoruo replied calmly. "It's that simple?" "Yes." Mu Peng was silent for a moment and then said, "A doctor has the heart of a parent. But, when you first came to Northern Qi, you only listened for a while in the Imperial Academy of Medicine in the Qing court. Why do you have such a great wish?" "Brother, it's not because of the wish, but because of what I want." Fan Ruoruo didn't think further and calmly said, "Brother once said, how should a person live their life? The first thing is to make one's state of mind happy. Treating people and saving people makes me happy, so I made this choice. How should a person live their life?" Mu Peng furrowed his brows slightly and sighed. He didn't say anything more. He was thinking, what kind of person was that Fan family boy who could make Fan Haitang lose her composure? It was not yet dusk. Fan Ruoruo carried the empty water bottle down the stone steps and returned to her little courtyard. She carefully tended to the herbs in the garden. Then, she walked back into the quiet room and began to prepare pen and paper. The furnishings in the room had not changed at all. She knew that this was, after all, Haitang's old residence. For the Northern Qi people, it had a different meaning. A letter was placed quietly on the table. A glimmer of joy flashed through Fan Ruoruo's eyes. She hurriedly opened the letter and looked closely at the familiar fine handwriting on it. As she read the letter, her expression changed endlessly. Sometimes it was nervous, sometimes it was happy, and sometimes it was faintly sad. The letter had been sent by Fan Xian. He had used a great deal of effort to send his sister to Northern Qi's Tianidao. The two of them were separated by a great distance, so it was not convenient for them to exchange messages. They each missed each other in their own places. Thus, after Ruoruo settled down, Fan Xian immediately resumed his monthly letter home. As a child, Ruoruo had returned to Jingdo from Danzhou at a young age. Ever since Ruoruo could read and write, Fan Xian had begun to correspond with her. Using the Qing kingdom's developed postal routes, the brother and sister's letters came and went between Jingdo and Danzhou, rain or shine, one letter a month without stopping until the 4th year of the Qing calendar, when Fan Xian entered Jingdo. No one knew how many years they had been writing letters. These letters contained a great deal of affection between the brother and sister. In the letters, they talked about the Red Chamber, the affairs of the manor, and the scenery and people of the two places. They talked about trivial family matters, and so on and so forth. It was through these letters that Fan Xian became one of his sister's teachers in terms of spirit. From a young age, Fan Ruoruo had been influenced by the contents of these letters. Her state of mind and attitude was different from most women in this world. No, it was different from most people in this world. She was still filial to her parents, loved her brothers, and got along very well with her sisters in the boudoir. However, there were many different things in her heart. She had a relatively independent personality and yearning for freedom. She was so incompatible with this world, yet she did not want to leave this world and live. It was because of this contradiction that, when she was in Jingdo, she became a polite, cold girl. It was only later in front of Fan Xian that she dared to reveal her true feelings. Thus, she went far away to a foreign country and lived a simple and bitter life. This kind of life, unusually terrifying in the eyes of a noble lady, made her happy and content. The beginning of all of this was a letter. It was a letter between Fan Xian and her. Fan Ruoruo looked at the letter in a daze. After a long time, she let out a faint sigh. The rims of her eyes were slightly moist. The struggles in court in Jingdo were still very far from her. She also believed in her father and brother's abilities, so she did not care about the dangers written in the letter. However, this time, Fan Xian mentioned Hongcheng in the letter. Hongcheng, Fan Ruoruo wiped away the tears at the corners of her eyes. The image of the gentle heir rose in her mind. He was going to the west to fight the Hu people. Would he get hurt? Would he come back? King Jing's manor and the Fan manor were old friends. Ruoruo had also grown up with Li Hongcheng. She knew that although he had great ambitions, he was, by nature, a very rare good person. Putting aside the romantic affairs on the pleasure boats, he was also infatuated with her. This time, Hongcheng had asked to leave the capital. One reason was to free himself from the struggle between the princes in Jingdo. She knew that this was also a kind of self-exile after she had hurt him. However, Fan Ruoruo was unable to accept Hongcheng. Her exquisite heart, which had been influenced by Fan Xian, was even more unable to accept this world's attitude toward men and women than Fan Xian himself. Isn't this a very ridiculous and interesting thing to do? Of course, even if there were no romantic affairs on the pleasure boats, even if Hongcheng was a perfect person, Fan Ruoruo still could not accept living with that man for the rest of her life. It was just like one of the stories Fan Xian had told in his letter. Those were all very good, but she just didn't like it. What story did he write to make you cry? A lazy and clear voice came from the door of the room. Your brother is indeed very detestable in certain aspects. Fan Ruoruo raised her head to see Haitang standing at the door wearing a thin flowery dress. She quickly stood up and said, "So it was you who sent the letter. I thought it was someone sent by Sir Wang." Haitang put her hands in her clothes and dragged her feet in. Wang Qinian isn't coming back. Didn't Fan Xian say? Right now, it's Deng Ziyu in Shangjing. You should have met him. Fan Ruoruo nodded. Haitang smiled slightly and said, I am truly curious about the contents of this letter. It actually made the usually calm you cry. Fan Ruoruo's fingers gripped the letter. She lowered her head and said, Don't make fun of me. Brother is still as long-winded as before. Haitang sighed and said, I have experienced this deeply. Fan Ruoruo tilted her head slightly and asked with confusion, Aren't you in Shangjing? Why have you returned to the mountain? Of course, Haitang couldn't have returned to the mountain just to send a letter to Fan Xian's sister. She gazed at Fan Ruoruo and smiled slightly. Teacher received a letter from second brother and thinks you can already leave the mountain. He had me accompany you to Shangjing. Go to Shangjing? Fan Ruoruo said with some difficulty. But, there are still many things I haven't learned. It's just that someone wants to see you, so he asked me to take you there, Haitang said. If you like life in the mountains, you can come back when the time comes. Don't you also like life in the mountains? Fan Ruoruo smiled. I didn't touch this room. I'll keep it. When the time comes, we'll live together. Hearing these words, Haitang sank into silence. After a long time, she sighed and said helplessly, Even if I wanted to come back, it wouldn't be a matter of a year or two. Fan Ruoruo knew that Haitang and her brother had been secretly doing something. Originally, with Fan Xian acting as a bridge between them, her relationship with Haitang had always been good. Furthermore, they spoke more casually. However, each time she thought of her sister-in-law, Lin Wan, far away in Qing Kingdom, Fan Ruoruo purposely kept her distance from Haitang. Perhaps this was a girl's careful thoughts. She suddenly thought of the words earlier and asked curiously, in Shangjing, Who wants to see me? Your Majesty. A glimmer of a smile rose to the corners of Haitang's lips. She thought that her emperor's thoughts were as difficult to guess as Fan Xian's. In Shangjing, not far from Qing Mountain, where Tianyi Taoist School was located, in the black and green, unique and beautiful royal palace, the master of the north, the northern Qi emperor, sat paralyzed on a low couch. His large feet were covered in cloth socks and gave off steam. His body was slanted in the arms of a beautiful woman in palace attire. Chapter 5:11. I don't think I did anything last summer. Lily held her head in her hands and felt a headache coming on. Ever since Fan Xian had mentioned this in his letter to Duo, the northern Qi emperor and the two women beside him had sunk into endless thought. No matter how they calculated, they could not figure out exactly what they had done to Fan Xian last summer. There was only one sentence in the letter. It was plainly written. It was like a warning, but it was more like a threat. The North did not understand just what had made Fan Xian so angry. They did not think that the reason for all of this was because Fan Xian had miscalculated the year. His original intention had been to warn the women in the north that he already knew about the matter of the broken temple. The northern Qi emperor furrowed his brows and coldly said, "Last year, I gave him a good sword through Wang Qinyan's hand. Even if he saw through this matter, it's fine if he doesn't thank me. Why did he send a letter to threaten the ant disciple? The Wei Emperor's sword?" Lily covered her mouth and smiled brightly. Or the Wei Emperor's sword? The pronunciation was the same. It took some time for the northern Qi emperor to understand this naughty joke. However, he didn't smile. On the contrary, his expression was slightly dark. Lily's heart jumped. She knew the emperor didn't like her to be too presumptuous, so she quietly closed her mouth and knelt to the side. The northern Qi emperor slowly sat up. His hands moved back from his temples and tied up his long black hair. His two strokes of handsome brows straightened. Calmly, he said, "Let's not talk about this for now. Fan Xijia has a large banquet tonight. I will have Wei Hua attend in my place. What do you think? Your Majesty is wise." Lily thought for a moment and then said seriously, "By tying the second son of the Fan family in Shangjing, Fan Xian will certainly behave himself in the south. Even if he has other thoughts, he has to think about his brother and sister. Speaking of sister, Ruoruo disciple should have arrived today." The northern Qi emperor smiled and waved his hand. He was unspeakably free and at ease. "As for what you say, it is a lie. It's not that we can threaten Fan Xian by tying the Fan family children in Shangjing. It is that Fan Xian has sent his brother and sister to this country and wants us to be nannies." He huffed coldly and continued, "What kind of person is Fan Xian? Since he dared to send them, of course he isn't afraid that we will use them as hostages. Back then, Chen Chen was so gentle and magnanimous in the palace. If you don't have any dealings with him, you won't know how sinister he is." Lily pursed her lips and smiled. But His Majesty still agreed. "I was talking about kidnapping, not taking hostages. Fan Ruoruo and Fan Xijia are doing well in northern Qi, and Fan Xian is in a good mood. In the future, perhaps he will come over one day." How could it be so simple? The northern Qi emperor smiled self-mockingly. He is doing very well in the Qing kingdom. Now that Li Yunrui has lost power, no one dares to touch him at all. How could he give up the supreme power in his hands and come to me? As for his arrangements, it can only mean that he is as sensitive and suspicious as his old emperor. A crafty rabbit has 3 burrows. He only sees my country as a path of retreat for his family." He sighed. He just had to be born in Jiangnan and in the palace treasury of the Qing kingdom. I need him for too many things. Even though I know he is using me, I can only agree. Within a year, the northern Qi emperor and Fan Xian had each chosen a spokesperson. They began to use the route the Chui family had used in the past, through Xia Mingji and Fan Xijia, and began to endlessly smuggle goods to the north. Both sides reaped great benefits. In order to prevent the Qing emperor from becoming suspicious, the matter was done in great secrecy. Even if it was discovered, it would not implicate these high-level figures. However, the two sides were already tied together. That was why Fan Xian was at ease to have his sister-in-law stay in northern Qi. His earlier words were correct. The northern Qi emperor was the good nanny Fan Xian had found. Furthermore, Fan Xian had already guessed the matter in the broken temple. When he used the northern Qi emperor, he was even less polite. Why would Fan Xian leave a path of retreat? Si Lily asked with confusion. Does he always think that the Qing kingdom is not a place where he will live for long? This is what I am most interested in. The northern Qi emperor smiled. Just what kind of person is Fan Xian? In the process of climbing up in the Qing kingdom, he has begun to look for a path of retreat. Does he think that one day, he will have a falling out with his emperor? It's really, a little inexplicable. He paused and then continued, do you still remember the time he sent you back to the capital? Si Lily immediately thought of their gentle interactions on the north and the boundless spring in the carriage. Her face heated slightly. She lowered her head and didn't reply. The northern Qi emperor laughed loudly. However, there was a slight sourness in the laughter. He used his finger to raise Si Lily's chin and gently said, Lily, I don't like you by my side thinking about other men. Si Lily lowered her head and didn't say anything. Her red lips held a smile. The northern Qi emperor huffed coldly. He found that this girl was becoming less and less afraid of him. He pulled his hand back and said, didn't you once say that on the road back north, Fan Xian had given you an antidote? Since that is the case, he has saved both your lives and mine. That is why I don't understand. He cooperated with me for his own benefit. That is a matter for the future. Before this, it seemed that he didn't want me to die. Additionally, there is the matter of a path of retreat earlier. His brows were furrowed tightly. He could not understand it no matter how he thought about it. Fan Xian, does he really think of himself as a person of the Qing kingdom? Si Lily slowly raised her head and smiled slightly at the worried emperor. She didn't say that when Fan Xian was still in Shangjing, he had already guessed that the emperor would not be harmed by the poison in his body. Although she was now a royal concubine and deeply loved by the northern Qi emperor, in addition to the unclear relationship between them, and deep in the palace, she did not care at all about the threat from the Qing kingdom's Overwatch Council. She also did not need to accept Fan Xian's remote control. For some reason, whenever she thought of the young man's hateful and gentle smile in the south, Si Lily's heart softened and hid much for him. Perhaps it was to see how the emperor, who had always been far-sighted, would fly into a rage in the future. The Qing kingdom is a great enemy of our dynasty. The northern Qi emperor furrowed his brows and said, I have a clear understanding of the beast-like thoughts of the Qing people. Even if Fan Xian has endless hatred toward the Qing royal family because of the Yi family matter, he is, after all, a person of the Qing kingdom. Why would he give me, this court so many benefits? Is he not afraid that once the Qi kingdom falls, it will make the Qing kingdom look bad? Hearing these words, Si Lily stopped her playful thoughts and sank into silence. She was a descendant of the Qing royal family and had an irreconcilable hatred with the Qing court. That was why she had turned to northern Qi. However, Fan Xian was, after all, the illegitimate child of the Qing emperor. Although the Qing emperor had many restrictions on him, in 3 short years, he had made him the most powerful official in the Qing court. What was there for Fan Xian to be dissatisfied with? Why would he secretly make so many deals with northern Qi? It couldn't be because of her, Si Lily thought self-mockingly. It also couldn't be because of Duo, much less the emperor. Although Fan Xian was a lustful person, he would not change his mind because of a woman. After she was silent for a long time, a thought suddenly flashed through her mind. Unless, he has never truly considered himself a person of the Qing kingdom. After saying this, she shook her head. Even she didn't believe these words. A strange light flashed through the northern Qi emperor's eyes. Immediately after, a faint disappointment rose. If Fan Xian truly did not consider himself a person of the Qing kingdom, then perhaps one day he would actually come to northern Qi. If Fan Xian came, he would bring countless benefits, such as the secrets of the palace treasury, the internal affairs of the Overwatch Council, and his identity. A prince of the Qing kingdom, a successor that Zhuang Mohan had appointed to betray the Qing kingdom and come to northern Qi. What kind of shock would this cause? How much benefit and danger would this bring to northern Qi? If Fan Xian truly came to join, the ambitious northern Qi emperor would certainly accept him regardless of the danger. However, he knew that this kind of speculation was impossible. Everyone knew that Fan Xian was a Qing person through and through. The Qing emperor would not be so stupid as to force his most promising son to not live on and take that last step. In reality, it was just that the people of this world could not understand the thinking of Fan Xian, a modern person. Ever since Fan Xian had said those words in the cave, he had already accepted his role as a person of this era. However, he did not have much of a sense of family and country. Because of the environment he had grown up in and the friends he had around him, his feelings toward the Qing kingdom were even deeper. In his view, the disputes of the world were actually just a kind of internal dispute, like the eldest branch fighting the second branch. It was like the spring and autumn period or the warring states period. There was no sense of moral shame in jumping around. The concept of treason had never existed in his mind. This was the unique mentality of outsiders. Walking up the quiet stone path of the royal palace in Shangjing, the eunuchs and serving girls opening the way carefully supported the young man at the side, terrified that the young man in the dragon robe would accidentally fall. The eunuchs holding the horsetail whisks and water bottles behind him stood on their tiptoes and lowered their heads, not daring to make a single sound. The expression of the northern Qi emperor was not very good. Ever since he was young, he hated having these servants around him, making it a rare opportunity for him to relax. However, the rules in the palace had always been like this. No matter how angry he was, he could not change this unless he killed all of these servants. But, what could he do even if he killed them all? Walking to the side of the third floor of the palace, a green tree slowly lowered its branches and gently rested on the black eaves. It was a beautiful contrast. The little emperor looked at this scene in a daze. He wondered why he rarely noticed these sights when he wandered around the palace every day. Was it because he saw so much every day that he habitually forgot? He suddenly remembered what Hai Tang had once told him. The Qing kingdom man imitated Hai Tang in walking in the palace. The man seemed to walk happily. His eyes moved quickly and greedily. It was as if he wanted to take in all of the beautiful scenery in the palace. Did that man naturally like beautiful things, which was why he could write such beautiful and clean words? The northern Qi emperor lowered his head. With his hands behind his back, he sank deep into thought. A moment later, he raised his head. A confident smile hung on his face. His feet changed direction and headed toward a mountain path to his right. At the end of the mountain path, the sound of a waterfall could faintly be heard. The eunuchs and serving girls beside him jumped in fright. Wasn't the emperor going to the summit to plant osmanthus? Why did he turn in that direction? No one dared to make a sound to stop him. They could only follow silently. The mountain path turned a few times and came to a platform by the cliff. There was a pavilion on the platform. The northern Qi emperor pointed at the pavilion. The eunuchs and serving girls at his side immediately rushed over. They set down the garden stools, lit incense, and swept away the dust. The emperor walked into the pavilion and looked at the stream below the pavilion and the spring flowers facing the cliff. His heart jumped slightly. In a quiet voice, he recited, slapping the railing, "The flowers in the forest blow at my temples, the mountain wind is cold, the grand song startles the floating clouds away." The people beside him hurriedly flattered, "Your Majesty." The Northern Qi Emperor smiled self-mockingly. He thought of how Fan Xian had only said 3 words to him in this pavilion, good words. To flatter me so carelessly. Fan Xian, you are still the only one. The Northern Qi Emperor smiled. Standing by the railing, he looked at the beautiful scenery of his world. "Everyone retreat. Everyone retreat," he suddenly ordered. The eunuchs and serving girls in the pavilion looked at each other. The mountain rocks were cold. If the emperor caught a cold, how would they explain it to the Empress Dowager? They knew that Northern Qi was the emperor's country. Although the emperor was young, his will was unusually firm. After Shenzhong's death, the emperor had strongly advocated for Shang Shanhu to be released to the south to fight against the Qin kingdom. He had also presided over a few major changes in the court. Even the officials did not dare to look at him as if he were a child. The pavilion immediately returned to its usual peace and quiet. The Northern Qi Emperor stood by the railing and took a deep breath. Thinking of Fan Xian's suggestion at the beginning, he thought that this kid was right. A moment later, he thought of another matter. His brows slowly furrowed. In a quiet voice, he said to himself, "Fan Xian, what exactly do you think? First worry about the worries of the world and then rejoice in the world's happiness? This world, is it the Qin kingdom's world, or the entire world?" The Northern Qi Emperor's brows gradually relaxed. He faintly sensed the truth of the situation. The corners of his lips twitched up in a rare manner. A strange smile appeared on his face. In a quiet voice, he said, "If you come to join me, I will make you a prince. That is at least a bit better than your current little duke. Take a day off tomorrow." Chapter 5:12. Yesterday, I went for a physical examination. The results will be out next week. Everything I know is fine, but my blood pressure is very high. It's 110 to 150. Both the doctor and myself were shocked. It's probably a problem caused by my evil writing work. Today, my blood pressure is much better. Everyone should exercise more and pay attention to their diet. Don't always sit in front of the computer reading and playing games. Your health is still the most important. In the mountain pavilion, the smile on the Northern Qi Emperor's face suddenly disappeared. He returned to his usual silence when he was alone. He had grown up in the royal palace. When his father first passed away, he faced the most difficult test of his life. Although, with the powerful support of imperial advisor Ku He, the Empress Dowager had carried him through this difficult time, such a beginning meant that his life as an emperor would not be smooth. There were many reasons for it not being smooth, but the most important one was the secret hidden in his heart, in the Empress Dowager's heart, and in imperial advisor Ku He's hearts that could never be spoken of. For this secret, the Northern Qi Emperor had made too many sacrifices and made too many changes that twisted his personality. He could not have too close a relationship with too many people. He could not be too intimate with his sisters. He could not be impudent and do whatever he wanted. In these dozen years, the people at his side had never changed. Even when he showered, it was as if he was facing a great enemy. The secondary concubines in the back palace still had hidden bitterness. In order to divert the Qin kingdom's attention and make the officials in court more alert, he and his mother had acted out the scene of mother and son not being in harmony for so many years. It had been very difficult. He didn't want to shoulder all this, but since he had already shouldered it, as a descendant of the Zhan family, he had inherited his grandfather's ambition and will to shake the world. He had to play his role well. It had to be admitted that he had done well these years. No one could find too many faults with the little emperor. He had condoned and even secretly lured Shang Shanhu to kill Shenzhong on a rainy night, seized the Shen family, and firmly controlled the entire brocade guard in the hands of the royal family. He had put Shang Shanhu under house arrest for a year to reduce his drive and then released him to suppress the overbearing Qing army in the south. Within the country, he had suppressed the tyrants and colluded with Fan Xian outside the country. One trick after another was used. These 2 years, the northern Qi court had become more and more orderly under his management. In particular, the Jiangnan matter proved the young emperor's deep foresight and scheming. Even if the person in charge of the Jiangnan palace treasury was not Fan Xian, presumably he still had the ability to secretly obtain some benefits. The northern Qi emperor knew that there were many levels of benefits. No matter how he imagined it, he had never thought that he could obtain so many benefits for his court through Fan Xian. He gently patted the railing and looked at the clear flowing water in the mountain stream. He sighed and softly said to himself, "But why did you come? What right do you have to give all the benefits to me?" A cold and mocking smile rose to the corners of his lips. The illegitimate son of the Qing emperor, how different can he be from his father? During the time he had spent learning to become an emperor, the only person the northern Qi emperor could find in the present world was the powerful ruler of the Qing kingdom. He knew that his peer, who was a generation older than him, was a powerful figure who had great ambitions but was also good at enduring silently. In the end, you will grow old, and you are already old. The northern Qi emperor furrowed his brows slightly. His gaze turned slightly and gazed toward the distant south. Thinking of the recent battle in the Qing kingdom royal family, he quietly said, "Even if you were a lion in the past and fought until the Wei kingdom fell apart and the Qi kingdom struggled at death's door, you are, after all, old. Your entire being emanates a sense of decay. I truly hope that you can continue to rot sinisterly like this and force him to come to me." These words seemed to sigh at every detail of history and seemed to increase his own confidence. Everyone knew that no matter how sensitive and suspicious the Qing emperor was, history only believed in history itself. Past history had already proven that the Qing emperor was the only victor in the world these 30 years. The northern Qi emperor narrowed his eyes. The corners of his lips twitched slightly. He muttered to himself, "I hope you can survive this time and allow me to openly defeat you on this stage of the world." He didn't quite understand Fan Xian. In reality, Fan Xian could not see him clearly either. As an emperor, no matter what color his heart was, his first consideration was his throne and the world. If his relationship with Fan Xian could always maintain peace and mutual benefits, the northern Qi emperor would not hesitate to fulfill Fan Xian's requests at all costs, such as Haitang and Fan Ruoruo's acceptance as a teacher. In the future, if Fan Xian threatened northern Qi, the northern Qi emperor would coldly and mercilessly use all the power at his disposal to eliminate Fan Xian. It had nothing to do with emotions, country, or gender. In this world, there were only 3 kinds of people: men, women, and emperors. The water in the stream below the pavilion flowed down the mountain until it reached the side of the group of palaces at the bottom of the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, it formed a pool of clear water. To the west of the clear water was a small gap made of white stone. The gurgling clear water flowed out through the gap, but it did not stir the pool at all. In the forest behind the pool of clear water, there was a large group of eunuchs and serving girls waiting with their heads lowered and quiet. No one knew that the emperor was in a daze in the pavilion halfway up the mountain. They only knew that the 2 most noble people in all of northern Qi, other than the emperor, were in a daze by the pool of water. Dressed in hemp garments and wearing a straw hat, imperial advisor Ku he was barefooted. He looked like an ascetic monk. He was sitting on a rock by the side of the pond, holding a fishing rod in his hand. The northern Qi Empress Dowager, who had put in a great deal of effort and endured a great deal of power and chaos in order for her son to sit firmly on the throne, smiled slightly as she sat by Master Ku He's side. Her brows were filled with peace and serenity. Back then, the Zhan family had risen from the chaos of the world and forcefully inherited the Wei Kingdom's heavenly treasure through military power. However, there had been endless years of war. Countless brave generals in the royal family had all lost their lives to the Qing Emperor's ruthless and ferocious attacks. After the Zhan Emperor died of illness, only she and the Northern Qi Emperor, an orphan and a widow, were left in the entire palace. At that time, the Qing Kingdom's Chen Pingping was in power. The northern court's political situation was in turmoil. The nobles were all clamoring, and the situation in the palace was precarious. Even under such circumstances, this woman still allowed her son to sit firmly on the throne. Most importantly, it was the imperial advisor's unyielding stance by her side. At the same time, it also proved that this Empress Dowager was not as mediocre as she appeared on the surface. Ku He's eyes calmly watched the unruffled surface of the water. The Empress Dowager smiled slightly. She thought of the changes in Shangjing this year. Back then, there had been changes in the palace. She had Chang Ningho risk his life to leave the palace and beg Shenzhong to bring people to help. Shenzhong and the brocade guard had performed a great service. However, the emperor had grown up and could not tolerate Shenzhong continuing to be arrogant, so he had an idea. The Empress Dowager felt guilty toward Shenzhong, but her son's mind was made up. She knew she could not persuade him, so she silently allowed this matter to happen. The people of the Zhan family seemed to always be stubborn and could not be changed by other people, such as her son or the person beside her. However, she still wanted to continue trying. Last night, the Northern Qi Emperor had talked with her for a long night and felt that this matter was not as beautiful as he had imagined. He had asked her to persuade Imperial Advisor Ku He. Thus, there had been today's greetings by the pond. I've never seen Li Yunrui. We've only exchanged a lot of secret letters, the Northern Qi Empress Dowager said gently. In front of Ku He, she would not call herself I. Although her expression was still dignified, her tone was like that of a little girl who did not understand much. Ku He smiled and said, the three countries are separated by a great distance. When Zhuang Mohan was invited to the south, he did not see the face of the eldest princess. The Empress Dowager sighed and said, as a result, Master Zhuang was left with a lifetime of regret. Ku He shook his head. But I have seen the eldest princess, so I know that she is not a simple woman. The change in Jingdo in the southern court this time happened so quickly. There was no movement at all. It is truly beyond my expectations. What Dodo means is. The Empress Dowager thought for a moment and then said, when two countries clash, it is still a battle of national power. It is better not to take risks. Why didn't he come and speak to me personally? Ku He smiled slightly. The child is still young. He probably does not understand why we old people are still so cautious when the Qing Emperor has been a mess these years. He continued, because I know, and you also know, that the Qing Emperor is truly not a normal person. In the second generation, a great grandmaster did not appear, but an emperor who used troops like a god. His brows furrowed. The longer he endured, the more uneasy I felt. The Northern Qi Empress Dowager sighed and said, even so, there is no good way. The old man smiled and took off his straw hat, revealing his large bald head. Happily, he said, I remember that Yi Luyun also likes to wear a hat and run all over the world. If even such a person can be used by Li Yunrui, I believe that the eldest princess will think of a way. Now that the topic had reached this point, the Empress Dowager knew that she could no longer persuade the imperial advisor to change his mind. Respectfully, she said, Uncle, let's watch a bit longer. Let the Qing court mess around on their own. It will always be good for us. There's not much time left. The fishing rod in Ku He's hand did not tremble at all. Slowly, he said, if we old people cannot solve this problem while we are alive, who will solve it in the future? These words were exactly the same as what the great grandmaster in the grass hut had said. The Empress Dowager's hand trembled slightly. She smiled and said, "What about Haitang? Besides, there is still Fan Xian in the south." Ku He smiled and said, "Fan Xian, this young man will have to depend on his luck. If he is smart and powerful enough, presumably he will obtain the greatest benefit in this matter. It can be considered a gift from our court." Given this young man's nature, since he has received such a great favor from Lil Pi, he will always think of Northern Qi in the future. When all was said and done, these people in power in Northern Qi knew that in terms of national power, Northern Qi, which had been accumulating problems for a long time, could not catch up to or surpass the Qing kingdom in a short period of time. In the grand scheme of things, within a dozen years, the Qing kingdom would still be the main attacker and Northern Qi the main defender. I had thought that the crown prince of the Qing court or the second prince had a better chance, the Empress Dowager said with a frown. Ku He shook his head. Fan Xian is such a murderous and fearful person. How could he give them a chance to ascend? If there really was such a possibility, do you think he would be unwilling to kill? In this entire world, there are not many people who can survive Fan Xian's murderous intent. The Empress Dowager was slightly surprised. She had not thought that the imperial advisor's evaluation of Fan Xian's strength would be so powerful. Don't forget, there is still a blind man behind him. Yi Luyun cannot be the bodyguard of the Qing princes. Ku He smiled and raised the fishing rod in his hand. A thin line was tied to the rod. He was not like some people who used a rope to fish senselessly in order to reach the realm of Dog-T. The fishing hook came out of the water. A few drops of clear beads fell back into the water. This pool of clear water in the royal palace seemed to be excited by these drops of clear beads. With a splash, the water rippled, causing the green water plants at the bottom of the pool to sway helplessly. Countless fish with golden or green tails leaped out of the water happily and slapped the surface of the water. It seemed to be expressing gratitude to the ascetic monk holding the fishing rod in his hand. The sound of the water gradually quieted. It flowed out of the gap in the clear pool, forming a white jade that moistened half the hill. It flowed out of the palace walls and merged into the Yuchuan River. The stream in the palace was only a tributary of the Yuchuan River. In reality, the Yuchuan River's name came from the stream on the Green Mountain in the royal palace, the Yuchuan. The Yuchuan River flowed into Shangjing. Not far from the palace walls, it passed a garden. This was Haitang's garden. To find peace and quiet in Shangjing's bustling area was a rare and good place. In the past, Fan Xian had mocked her for being obsessed with fame. He had not thought that this kind of garden was secretly full of nobility. There was not a hint of the countryside at all. At this moment, two girls walked out of the garden. They boarded the carriage outside the garden and headed into the city. It did not take long for the carriage to reach the busiest part of Shangjing. The speed of the carriage slowed. As it passed an antique shop, the driver seemed to hear the call of the girl in the carriage and stopped. Haitang put down her right hand that had pulled up the curtain and turned her head to Fan Ruoruo. "It's your brother. Do you want to go down and say hello?" Fan Ruoruo smiled and said, "Since he's treating today, let's not see him early. Let's walk around Shangjing first." Haitang nodded. The carriage began to move again without disturbing the people in the antique shop. Inside the antique shop, a slightly plump young man was looking at the goods inside with his head down. This person was none other than the second young master of the Fan family who had been kicked to Shangjing by Fan Xian. He had suffered countless hardships at Haitang's hands and finally made it out. He had taken over the Chui family's northern route, Fan Sidu. Perhaps it was because he had changed his appearance or because the life away from home had made this young man mature early. At this moment, his countenance was completely calm. There was no trace of the arrogance and ruthlessness of the past. It made people think he was much more mature than his true age. Tonight, he was holding a large banquet in the Shangjing branch of Baoyue brothel. He knew ahead of time that his sister and Haitang, the two people he feared the most, were coming, so he had come out early to buy gifts from the antique shop. He had to make sure that these two were happy. However, after looking for a long time and even having the shop owner bring out all the goods from his collection, he still did not find anything satisfactory. This made his mood a bit unhappy. Behind him were still the Northern Qi aces and bodyguards with curved knives at their waists. Although the Fan brothers knew that this was definitely a group of people monitored by the Northern Qi royal family, Fan Xizha was as daring as Fan Xian. He continued to use them casually and did not change them out. There were other people looking at the goods in the shop. From the color of their clothing, one could see that they were either wealthy or of high status. This antique shop was very famous, and the goods sold were also very expensive. Thus, the people who dared to come in and pick out items were all important figures in Northern Qi. If they were not wealthy merchants, then they were nobles. These people did not recognize Fan Xizha, but seeing that he had brought 4 ace guards with him, they secretly guessed that this young man must be the son of some family that did not like to show off. At this moment, the shop owner walked in with a very solemn expression, carrying a wooden tray covered by a red cloth. He moved closer to Fan Xizha's side and said, "Young master, if you want a pair, then this is the only one." Fan Xizha lifted a corner of the red cloth and saw that on the tray was a pair of jade lions. The carving was excellent. The lions had the heads of tigers and were exceptionally cute. He couldn't help but smile. He thought that giving this pair to his sister and Haitang was indeed appropriate. It also had the intention of helping him vent some anger. "This is it." He waved his hand. Unfortunately, the nobles looking at the goods to the side also had their eyes on this pair of jade lions. They begged Fan Xizha to raise his hand and let them go. A rich young master was even willing to give a red packet to show his sincerity. In large places like Shangjing, Jingdou, and Dongyi, there were usually not many situations where people relied on power to steal goods. After all, everyone present was either wealthy or of high status. No one knew who they would offend. In Shangjing, Fan Xizha had always kept a low profile. The Qing kingdom's wanted posters still had his name. Other than the brocade guards, the Qing royal family, and related officials, not many people knew his true identity. If this had been in the past, Fan Xizha might have agreed to such a gentle request from this rich young master. However, he truly liked this pair of jade lions, so he hesitated and did not speak. With this hesitation, the mood of the nobles became unhappy. They thought that they had already given him enough face. If the Marquis had not been invited to an important gathering and given the matter of buying gifts to the young master, they would not have needed this pair of precious jade lions as gifts. Why would they have to speak to this stranger? The people parted. A 12 or 13-year-old nobleman walked out. Pointing at Fan Xizha's nose, he cursed, "In Shangjing, no one dares to fight with me for things." Fan Xizha furrowed his brows. If this had been in the past, he would probably have thrown out a punch long ago. As he grew older, his temperament was much more stable. He asked, "You are?" Someone kindly reminded him, "This is the young master of the Marquis of Chang'an's family." The Marquis of Chang'an and the Marquis of Changningho were the brothers of the Northern Qi Empress Dowager. This status was indeed sufficiently noble. After Fan Xizha paused slightly, he laughed hatefully. "Your father wants to give a gift tonight, right?" No matter how much Fan Xizha had improved, he was, after all, a lawless person in the past. Gritting his teeth, he stared fiercely into the child's eyes and said, "Little brat." After these words were said, the people in front of them all surrounded them. The crowd was ferocious and seemed ready to attack. Fan Xizha laughed coldly and led the 4 scimitar guards out of the antique shop. In the carriage outside, a strange light flashed through the eyes of a scimitar guard. He asked Fan Xizha, "Boss, do you know that young master?" Fan Xizha spat and cursed, "That little brat. Back then, Big Brother broke his arm, yet he hasn't improved at all. If he dares to provoke me again, I would have broken his other arm." Inside the antique shop, everyone looked at each other. They thought that the guy earlier was very daring to call the young master of the Marquis of Chang'an a little brat to his face. Without further ado, the young master picked the gift and forcefully suppressed his anger. Happily, he returned to his manor and followed his father to the Baoyue brothel branch in Shangjing that had opened less than 4 months ago. He was ready to participate in this important gathering. When he entered the building and sat beside his father, he looked at the fat man sitting at the head of the table chatting cheerfully with his cousin. He was immediately dumbfounded. His cousin was called Wei Hua. He was the most outstanding young man in the entire Wei family. Presently, he was deeply appreciated by the emperor and held the important position of commander of the provost of the brocade guard. In all of northern Qi, he had terrifying power. However, such a powerful figure was, at this moment, chatting freely with the chubby young man like they had been friends for many years. There seemed to be a faint wariness between his brows. The young master of the Marquis of Chang'an watched this scene in a daze. He thought to himself, "The chubby brother who called me a little brat earlier, who exactly was he?" While Fan Xizha and Wei Hua were talking, he glanced below the table from the corner of his eyes and found that Marquis of Chang'an had brought his good-for-nothing son. He thought to himself, "That old thing is already so old. How could he have such a young son? Don't tell me he's wearing a hat." As he criticized silently, he smiled at Marquis of Chang'an and greeted him. Today's banquet was initiated by him. He did not invite outsiders. Everyone was a member of the Northern Qi royal family. The purpose was also very simple. The news from the Qing court was clear that Li Yunrui had already fallen. It seemed that there was no one within the Qing kingdom that could threaten his brother. Thus, he had to grasp this opportunity and expand the scope of his business. Doing business with Northern Qi was actually doing business with the Northern Qi emperor's family. Thus, he had invited everyone in the Wei family. At the same time, he had asked Haitang and his sister to help him suppress the situation. What was Fan Xizha afraid of? All of the low-priced goods in the south were in his hands. The products of the palace treasury were endlessly delivered to his hands by Xia Mingji. If the Wei family wanted to get rich, they had to rely on him. Chapter 5:13. My condition is so. Charging my laptop keeps tripping at home. I am very annoyed. Sorry. The banquet proceeded smoothly, at least on the surface, particularly after Fan Xizha accepted the pair of jade lions from Marquis Chang, and with a false smile. However, as the host, Fan Xizha habitually glanced out of the hall of Baoyue brothel. He had reserved the entire Baoyue brothel, so there were no other guests. Sitting beside him, Wei Hua furrowed his brows slightly and wondered who else was coming. Why hadn't he received any news beforehand? Looking at Fan Xizha's expression, one could imagine that the identity of the guests who were about to arrive was not low. Otherwise, he would not be unable to suppress his anticipation and nervousness. If the identity of the guests was not low, why had the banquet begun before the guests arrived? Wei Hua unconsciously shook his head. A self-mocking and bitter smile rose to the corners of his lips. He knew that he could not use common sense to judge these two brothers of the Fan family. He was now the commander of the provost of the Northern Qi brocade guard. He had taken over Shenzhong's former position. Most of Northern Qi's special forces were under his control. The little Northern Qi emperor's trust in him could not be said to be weak. His power could not be said to be small. However, once he faced the Fan brothers from the south, Wei Hua still felt faintly nervous. Fan Xian was in charge of the Overwatch Council. He and Wei Hua were in the same line of business. However, Wei Hua knew that he had not delved into this line of work as long as Fan Xian had. The Northern Court's Brocade Guard also did not have as much power as the Southern Court's Overwatch Council. If the two of them actually fought across the border, he would not be a match for the other. As for Fan Xizha, Wei Hua looked at the chubby young man beside him who was entertaining the guests and furrowed his brows slightly. He had to admit that he had indeed misjudged this person 2 years ago. He had thought that Fan Xian was just using the power in his hands to send his brother to Northern Qi to escape. He had not thought that after a year, Fan Xizha, hidden behind the scenes, had firmly controlled the old Shui family's routes. His secret business was also flourishing. This was completely not the business sensitivity and ability a young man should have. Wei Hua slapped his forehead. Smiling, he toasted Fan Xizha and cracked a few jokes. The purpose of Fan Xizha's invitation today was clear. The smuggled goods from the south had to be taken over by someone. They couldn't let a Qing man openly sell them in Northern Qi. In the past, it had always been the Wei clan, especially Chang Ningho, who had taken over. Now that Fan Xizha was becoming more and more daring, he felt that Chang Ningho's family was moving too slowly. That was why he had dragged Chang Anho in as well. Wei Hua did not dislike this arrangement. It was not because the Marquis of Chang'an was his uncle. Rather, he knew that the Wei family was just a puppet the emperor had placed in front of the stage. The majority of the profits flowed endlessly into the emperor's internal treasury through this business. Furthermore, no matter how much trouble Fan Xizha could cause, he was, after all, on Northern Qi territory. Wei Hua had enough power to keep an eye on him. Once things went wrong, the Brocade Guard could easily clean out all of Fan Xizha's businesses. It was just that Wei Hua wouldn't dare to do such a thing until things had reached the final step. He didn't even dare to ask for an imperial edict. Northern Qi needed the goods Fan Xian had spat out from the Qing palace treasury. Wei Hua was afraid of Fan Xian's sinister methods and his unreasonableness. The curtain at Baoyue Brothel's door moved slightly. 2 girls entered together. Wei Hua's hand holding the wine cup shook and almost spilled it. He knew the 2 girls. This was also one of the reasons why Wei Hua had always been deeply afraid of Fan Xian. Haitang and Fan Ruoruo. Wei Hua stood to welcome them. He turned around and pretended to scold Fan Xizha a few times before inviting the 2 noble disciples of Tianyi Dao to sit at the main table. For a moment, the scene was awkward. Everyone in Northern Qi knew that the Empress Dowager's intention was for Haitang to marry Wei Hua. However, Haitang and Fan Xian had some unclear relationship. Wei Hua laughed bitterly and said to Haitang, "Second young Master Fan is inviting us. You really don't give me any face by coming like this." Haitang smiled and took the jade lion Fan Xizha handed to her. She fiddled with it and said, "You just like to talk." Wei Hua laughed and didn't say anything more. From a long time ago, he knew that this woman was not someone he could touch. When the Empress Dowager had first shown interest, the first thing he did was enter the palace to decline. However, it didn't have much effect. The Empress Dowager's love for her juniors was always unreasonable. The Empress Dowager was unreasonable, Fan Xian was unreasonable, and Wei Hua did not have the courage. This matter offended Fan Xian too much. Besides, if he married a 9th-level ace, how could he maintain his authority? Besides, although Haitang was intelligent, her looks were very average. Last year, Wei Hua's sister had followed Lang Tiao to Jiangnan. When they passed through Wuzhou, they had gotten into an argument. Wei Hua knew Fan Xian's petty personality and that he must be holding a grudge. He had no choice but to write a letter and say many good things before Fan Xian's anger subsided. As his thoughts drifted through the years, Wei Hua couldn't help but sigh. Fan Xian, Fan Xian, you don't give me any face at all. You always push yourself down on everything. We are in the same line, so why are you in such a rush to destroy each other? As the commander of the Brocade Guard, why was he not as happy as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council? Ever since Haitang and Fan Ruoruo entered Baoyue brothel, the banquet in the hall became much quieter. The shrewd and ruthless elders of the Wei family put on the airs of elders and chatted with the two girls. In their hearts, they were thinking that they had originally wanted to help the emperor get more benefits in this negotiation. Now that these two had arrived, particularly Haitang, where were her arms and elbows born? Thus, their attacks on Fan Xizha slowed down. Fan Xizha's expression was calm as he spoke with a slight smile. In their casual conversation, he clearly explained the division of profits in the coming year and the details of the handover. He had Haitang and her sister come today to give himself a bargaining chip. At least, he wanted to mess up the hearts of the northern Qi people. Nominally, it was his negotiation with the Wei family. In reality, although not everyone at the banquet knew about Fan Xian and the northern Qi emperor's shady dealings, Chang Ningho and his son, who led the Wei family, knew. After 3 rounds of wine, the discussion ended. Both sides parted happily. However, Wei Hua's expression was not very happy. It was clear that in this new round of agreement on dividing the spoils, Fan Xizha had still taken the lion's share. The night gradually darkened. Haitang held the warm jade lion and glanced at Fan Xizha with a not quite there smile. She then left, leaving Baoyue brothel to the siblings. I don't like Haitang, Fan Xizha said with a furrowed brows in a room in the Jingdo branch of Baoyue brothel. You're becoming more and more old and heavy. Fan Ruoruo patted her brother's head out of habit and smiled slightly. What's wrong with sister? Don't tell me you still hold a grudge against me for using you like a donkey? Fan Xizha shook his head and said, that was brother's intention. He wanted me to suffer. I understand. Fan Ruoruo looked at her brother with some surprise. Tilting her head, she said, you're truly becoming more and more old. You're not like a child at all. Fan Xizha smiled self-mockingly and said, in a place like this, there's no one I can trust. There's nothing I can do if I don't want to be careful. Right, sister, you said old. His spirit suddenly rose and he asked, are you saying that I'm becoming more and more like brother? Fan Xizha asked excitedly. In his heart, his older brother was his life's idol. If he could get closer to his older brother's image, naturally, he would be more pleased. Fan Ruoruo covered her smile and said, you're becoming more and more like father. It looks like father's beating you back then did have some effect. She paused and then said, earlier, you said you didn't like sister Haitang. Why? Fan Xizha looked quietly into his sister's eyes and didn't speak for a moment. Fan Ruoruo also looked at him calmly. Sister, you should understand, Fan Xizha said seriously. We already have a sister-in-law. Fan Ruoruo's brows also furrowed. She sighed and said, yes. Fan Xizha furrowed his brows and thought for a moment. In a quiet voice, he said, actually, you don't even know that during this year, sister-in-law has written me many letters. Fan Ruoruo was slightly startled and asked, what did she say in the letters? What could she say? It's just how the family is, how father is, and how mother is. Fan Xizha sighed. My brother-in-law is alone in a foreign country. Of course, sister-in-law is worried. To tell the truth, during this year, whenever I have something I don't understand, I don't want to go and trouble brother. It's all sister-in-law who help me think of ideas. Fan Ruoruo gradually digested the shock in her heart. This was also the first time she had heard of this matter. She thought about it for a moment and tasted many flavors. She sadly said, sister-in-law is a very pitiful person. As you know, the eldest princess is currently imprisoned by the emperor in a side courtyard, and brother is in Jiangnan. Brother only knows how to kick me to the north. Fan Xija's tone carried dissatisfaction. Fan Xija sounded dissatisfied. Even though I know he's training me, has he ever thought about how young I am? Such a big mess, how could I manage it? I only know how to let go. How could I be as thorough as you think? Fan Ruoruo furrowed her brows and scolded, it's not easy for brother in the south. If it wasn't for him standing firm, how could you stand firm in the north? How is he letting go? The shopkeepers of Qingyu Hall are all secretly helping you. The Overwatch Council's network in northern Qi is also serving you. In order to raise you, he has put a lot of effort. As for training, it's not like you don't know what kind of person brother is. He grew up alone in Danzhou. I don't know what kind of person he has gone through to get to where he is today. This is what he believes in. This is how he treats himself. We are his brothers and sisters. Of course, he would also choose this method. After a string of scoldings, it was as if Fan Xija had returned to Jingdou a few years ago. At that time, he, who was not afraid of heaven or earth, was only afraid of the iron ruler in his sister's hand. In an instant, he softened. A moment later, he muttered, in any case. I don't like Haitang. Fan Ruoruo sighed and said, it's not like you don't know how much Haitang has helped brother in secret. It's just an exchange of benefits. Other than the dead Zhuang Mohan, how many people in northern Qi are truly saints who do not care about worldly matters? Fan Xija smiled coldly. Don't look at how you've entered Ku He's tutelage and how I'm the #1 boss. If brother is no longer useful to northern Qi, I'm afraid we will immediately be stepped on. At that time, I don't expect Haitang to stick up for us. Fan Ruoruo said seriously, my view is the opposite of yours. Fan Xija shook his head and faintly said a moment later, no matter what, there has to be a first come, first served, right? Fan Ruoruo thought deeply for a long time and slowly nodded. She also felt great pity for her respectable and amiable sister-in-law, who was used to being silent and hurt. She agreed with her brother's view. Suddenly, an absurd thought welled up in her heart. If it was said first come, first served, shouldn't she be the first to reach brother's side? It was just that fate played tricks on her. A trace of bitterness rose to the corner of her lips. Shortly after, she suppressed this undeserved emotion and worried with her brother about Lin Wan's fate. Brother is definitely not someone who is fickle and indifferent. It's just that now, sister-in-law is stuck between the eldest princess and brother. She really doesn't know what to do. Don't think so much. Fan Xija shrugged. Right now, the most important problem is brother's situation in the south. I saw that you had a large banquet tonight and thought you'd already forgotten yourself. The eldest princess has fallen. Naturally, I have to use this opportunity to earn more money, Fan Xija said. But right now, only brother's faction is powerful in the court. I just feel that there will be some problems. Perhaps you're thinking too far ahead. It's not exactly powerful, but it's standing at the edge of the wind. Fan Ruoruo smiled slightly. Regardless of whether it's family affairs or national affairs, it doesn't seem to be something that people like us who are guests in a foreign land can worry about. Fan Xija was startled. Given his sister's usual attitude, he thought, she should be very worried about Fan Xian's safety. Why did she appear so indifferent? But he didn't dare to criticize his sister. He unconsciously asked, whose poem? Brother. Didn't he compose a poem? He doesn't do it in front of outsiders. We really don't care. What can we worry about? Fan Ruoruo's calm expression carried a sense of confidence in her brother. He worked so hard to send us to northern Qi because he doesn't want us to be involved in these matters. If we really want to do what's best for him, then we must live well here and not make him worry. How do you live well? Is it happy being a boss? It's okay, although sometimes it's a bit troublesome. I'm going to the medical shop tomorrow. I also feel that this kind of life is very happy. Brother said that people live in this world to find things they like to do. Chapter 5:14. June 1st, I wish everyone a happy holiday. A new month is a new beginning. Looking back at last month, it was truly a series of difficult things. This story is also very difficult. My condition has entered the worst period. I have held on, but there are still a few chapters that were poorly written, including yesterday's chapter. I am truly sorry. I am satisfied with the chapters before and after the thunderstorm, but I still have some regrets. In my original fantasies, I should have written better. I should have been able to do better, so I continue to apologize. I don't know how much I can write this month because it really is something. I will do my best to ensure that it is at least 130,000 words. Last month, I took third place in the monthly votes. This is my best ranking since I posted my book online. I received a total of 6,000 yuan in prize money. I sincerely thank everyone for your support. Please continue to support the lazy but serious me. Thank you. From Jiangnan Road to Jiangbei Road, there were 3 convenient routes. No matter which one they took, they would always have to cross the mighty river. In the present world, there were no concrete bridges that Fan Xian was familiar with. There was only the endless stream of ferries between the two sides to support the busy waterside traffic. The 3 large workshops of the palace treasury were in North Min, the transport company Yamen was in Suzhou, and Sir Fan Jr. was in Hangzhou. It appeared that the palace treasury's control was loose. Only the officials and merchants who had the opportunity to come into contact with this portion of the palace treasury knew how strict the control over the warehouses and special routes throughout Jiangnan was after the Overwatch Council and the palace treasury Yamen worked together. In particular, the route to the north purposely took a turn to the west. From Shazhou, it crossed the river to the north, then crossed the barren mountains of Jiangbei Road, the meadows of Zhangzhou Road, and then circled around the North Sea. It endlessly sent into northern Qi territory and brought back rich silver for the Qin kingdom to purchase other needs. Most of the goods heading north were under Xia Mingji's control. With Fan Xian's help, Xia Qifei placed a few large bids and secretly consolidated the small businesses and gangs in the Jiangnan area. He had gradually become powerful. In the eyes of the officials, the reason he chose to cross the river in Shazhou was because the Jiangnan Navy was stationed there. Only Fan Xian and he knew that Shazhou was chosen because the Jiangnan water bandits had the strongest power there. Although the palace treasury goods could be sent by the court to supervise the delivery, the things inside could not be trusted to let the court watch them all. Xia Qifei sat in a tea shop outside the city gate of Shazhou. While drinking tea, he looked at the ships transporting goods on the smooth river and narrowed his eyes slightly. The second young master in the north suddenly increased his appetite for goods, but it was not to the extent that he could not accept them. After all, the doors of the palace treasury were completely open to Fan Xian's trusted aides. However, to send all the goods there in such a short amount of time, and at the same time not raise the court's suspicions, required careful planning. Fortunately, according to court practice, the Overwatch Council was responsible for supervising the operation of the palace treasury. Now, the worries of the officials in the court had finally become reality. Fan Xian monitored himself. How could there not be a problem? Xia Qifei put down the teacup and slowly savored the bitter taste in his mouth. However, there was not a trace of bitterness in his heart. Looking back on this year and a half, he sometimes felt like he was dreaming. Ever since he climbed onto the imperial envoy's thigh, the family grudge that had bitten his heart for over a decade like a poisonous snake had been resolved in one day. The Ming family had once again returned to his hands. His identity had also changed from the shady head of the Jiangnan water bandits to an official of the Overwatch Council and a wealthy merchant whose name shook Jiangnan. The matters of this world were indeed somewhat wondrous. However, he also knew that the present Ming family was no longer the Ming family of the past. Although the court had not directly interfered, if Sir Fan Jr. truly gave the order, he could only follow it completely. Thinking of this, he pulled back his satisfied gaze from the boxes of goods in the boats on the river and furrowed his brows slightly. There were some things he did not understand. Smuggling palace treasury goods to northern Qi was, without question, the most profitable business in the world. Given Sir Fan Jr.'s identity, why was he so greedy? Sir Fan Jr. had once explained that the reason the eldest princess was greedy for silver was because she wanted to seek power in court, pave the foundations for the princes, and buy people's hearts in the military. However, Sir Fan Jr. was a prince. After he returned to the Fan family, it was impossible for him to take over the throne. What did he need so much silver for? Furthermore, the emperor had not liked the eldest princess secretly emptying out his palace treasury. Would the emperor allow Sir Fan Jr. to do this now? Ever since the eldest princess, Li Yunrui, lost power, this not too big or too small shock wave lightly swept through the hearts of the nobles under heaven and did not stir up any more waves. Of course, this was only the calm on the surface. No one knew exactly what the people were thinking in secret. However, everyone now knew how deeply the powerful official in the Qing court, Fan Xian, was favored and trusted by the Qing emperor and how much power he held in his hands. Inevitably, the crowd grew wary and hopeful. No matter what was said, in the hearts of the people under heaven, Fan Xian was still a scholar. His performance on the stage these few years made it clear to everyone that he was different from the other noble sons of the Qing kingdom. He was not as hot-blooded and belligerent. Naturally, northern Qi and Dongyi hoped that Fan Xian would last a long time. No matter how much the northern Qi emperor wanted to pull Fan Xian to his side as a prince, he knew that Fan Xian staying in the Qing kingdom would benefit him the most. He hoped that Fan Xian would have as much power as possible and as much favor as possible. It would be best if he was powerful enough to influence the Qing emperor's decisions. However, this was only an extravagant hope and idealism. No emperor would be stupid enough to place his hopes of peace on an official of a foreign country. The peace between countries was, in the end, reflected in power. The power of a country was military power. Since the beginning of spring, in the vast wilderness to the north of Yanjing and east of Cangzhou, northern Qi's mighty general, Shang Shanhu, had been released from house arrest and landed on the southern front. In a short amount of time, he established his absolute authority in the military. He began daily military drills, maintaining a powerful deterrent to the Qing army and suppressing the ambitions of the Qing people. Directly opposing Shang Shanhu was a general of the Qing kingdom, northern governor Yan Xiaoyi. When these two powerful people collided, how could there not be some sparks and the smell of blood gradually rising? Although there was no fighting on the border, there were some small scuffles and purposely created tense atmosphere. Gradually, the air began to fill. Xia Mingji, which Xia Qifei was in charge of transporting palace treasury goods to the north, had to make a detour to the northern sea south of Cangzhou because the situation in Cangzhou had always been tense. However, all of this had completely changed this month. For some reason, Shang Shanhu had suddenly pulled back his troops 50 li to the north and moved his troops. He adopted a lazy posture of neither defending nor advancing. It was as if he did not care that Yan Xiaoyi was leading 100,000 elite soldiers in the area between Yanjing and Cangzhou. He stared like a bull, wanting to come up and take a bite at any moment. Tension suddenly became leisure. The display of power between the two countries suddenly became an outing. The instantaneous change made the Qing military feel an inexplicable anger and shock. What exactly were the northern Qi people thinking? Yan Xiaoyi knew what the northern Qi people were thinking. He picked up his cup and drank a mouthful of the strong alcohol produced on the grasslands further north of the northern sea. The alcohol wetted his beard slightly. The cold light in his eyes gradually grew. Ever since the news from Jingdo had reached Zhangzhou, Yan Xiaoyi knew he was facing a crisis. When his trusted aide lowered his voice and suggested ideas at night, he remained calm and didn't say a word. When Shang Shanhu led the northern Qi army and slowly withdrew, he assumed the posture of a naked woman reclining on the couch. Yan Xiaoyi was not surprised or confused. He only smiled coldly. The northern Qi people also knew of the eldest princess' loss of power and knew that the emperor would certainly take him down. Thus, Shang Shanhu purposely showed weakness and removed all the pressure he had placed on Yan Xiaoyi so that he could preserve all of his strength and spirit. What was the point of preserving this? Naturally, it was to deal with their own emperor. Yan Xiaoyi slowly put down his wine cup. A cold smile rose to the corners of his lips. If the northern Qi emperor suddenly wanted to act against Shang Shanhu, he would also do the same. There were internal problems in the enemy country. As his own side, he had to stand by and watch and give the enemy as much space and power as possible. Only in this way could the other side struggle themselves. After they killed each other, he could sit back and reap the benefits. It could not be said to be unpleasant. However, Yan Xiaoyi didn't seem to have made any preparations. It was as if he was just waiting for that day. He was waiting for a few old and wrinkled eunuchs to come on horseback, exhausted, shouting themselves hoarse, and with faces full of terror. Yet, they forced themselves to be calm and announced the emperor's edict to him. Yan Xiaoyi, wait, the eldest princess had fallen. As the eldest princess' trusted aide and her greatest support in the army, the emperor would not allow him to continue to control the elite soldiers of the Northern Expedition Army. Yan Xiaoyi knew this very well. He had already made preparations, so he didn't see the anger on his trusted aide's face. However, contrary to his expectations, the emperor's edict had yet to arrive. Worry floated onto his face. He thought to himself, just what kind of crime does the emperor want to lay on me for it to take so long? The strong wine burned his heart. It burned Yan Xiaoyi's heart. Did the emperor really trust him that much? The emperor knew that he had been nothing more than a hunter in the mountains. If it hadn't been for the eldest princess, he would probably have been unknown for his entire life. Furthermore, Fan Xian had killed his son. Although Yan Xiaoyi had never found evidence, he believed that within the Qin kingdom, other than the emperor, there were only two crazy people who dared to kill his son. Other than the eldest princess, it was the crazy Fan Xian. The emperor could not kill his illegitimate child to avenge his son. This was the biggest irreconcilable conflict between Yan Xiaoyi and the emperor. Yan Xiaoyi's ruthless personality was destined to not surrender without a fight and die of old age in Jingdo. However, he would also not lead troops to throw themselves at the northern Qi ruler and officials watching the show in the north. That was a kind of humiliation. Yan Xiaoyi once again picked up the wine cup filled with strong wine and drained it in one gulp. Letting out a long sigh, he truly didn't know what to do. Then, he received a letter. The person who wrote this letter was someone he had never thought of. Looking at this letter, his hand holding the letter began to tremble. The hand that had always been as steady as a mountain, the hand that could control the bowstring like a god, and the hand that was still like steel under the pincer attack of the Shadow and Fan Xian, two 9th-level aces, actually began to tremble. It was still the end of spring in the Qin kingdom, but far away on the border of the south, it was already blistering hot. All around, the lush forest was scorched weakly by the sun high up in the sky and laid softly on the mountain rocks. The vines on the mountain rocks had long withered from the high temperature of the rocks. The heat was not scary. What was scary was the humidity in the dense forest. For some reason, there were so many torrential rains in the south. Although the rain did not last for long, when the rainwater fell to the ground, it did not even have time to sink into the earth before it was baked into steam by the high temperature. It enveloped the forest, animals, and people walking on the road, making it difficult for all living things to breathe. A majestic group was lazily walking on the road. The officials of the Ministry of Rites and Honglu Temple, who were responsible for the face of the heavenly kingdom, had pulled open their robes without a care for propriety. Military discipline had always been strict. The hundreds of imperial soldiers in shining armor also had their robes and hats askew. Even the tiger guards surrounding the carriages in the middle began to have a sense of tiredness and rashness in their eyes. In the carriage in the middle sat the crown prince of the Qin kingdom. It had been more than a month since he had left the capital. The ceremony in Nanzhao had gone smoothly. After holding the coffin and crying a few times in front of the deceased king's coffin and gently chatting a bit with the child king and witnessing the ascension ceremony, the crown prince and his group set off for the north. The reason they had chosen to travel under such a large sun was because when the sun was strong, it was not easy for fog to form in the forest. In the dense forest between Nanzhao and the Qin kingdom, the most terrifying thing was the poisonous fog. Crown Prince Li Qingqian knocked on the window of the carriage, indicating for the entire group to stop. He then walked down from the carriage with the help of a eunuch and quietly said something to the main official of the Ministry of Rites. A tiger guard respectfully said, "Your Highness, take advantage of the sun to leave in order to avoid being invaded by the poisonous fog." The crown prince smiled slightly and said, "Let's rest. Everyone is tired." "I'm afraid we won't be able to make it to the inn in front," the tiger guard said with difficulty. "Didn't I say yesterday that there was a small inn in front of the inn?" The crown prince said amiably. "It would be good to stay there tonight." The official from the Ministry of Rites who had been questioned earlier tried to dissuade him. "What kind of status does your highness have? How can you just casually stay in the wilderness? The inn in Tiancheng County is too run down. The large inn we decided on last night has already been prepared to welcome your highness." The crown prince insisted on not allowing it. He only said that his attendants were already exhausted. The official from the Ministry of Rites couldn't help but ask with some fear, "But if we miss the return date, I will bear all the responsibility." "We can't let these soldiers tire themselves out until they fall ill," the crown prince said with a frown. An order was sent down for the hundreds of people to rest on the spot. They would spend the night in Tiancheng County. They should be able to make it in time. Hearing these words, the soldiers and tiger guards immediately let out a breath and thanked the crown prince. They set up defenses on the two sides of the road and split up to rest. Everyone knew that the crown prince felt sorry for their hard work. They all gave him grateful gazes, but they didn't dare let the crown prince see these gazes. During this month, from Jingdou south to Nanzhao and then back north, the road was long and dangerous. However, the crown prince was not as delicate as people had imagined. He didn't make a sound. Furthermore, he comforted and encouraged his subordinates and was unspeakably amiable. Along the way, everyone had a new understanding of the crown prince. They felt that the crown prince truly pitied his people. Not only did he not have any resentment toward the emperor's edict, he also never forgot about them. The crown prince received the edict to attend the ceremony in Nanzhao. In the eyes of the people of the world, such a difficult and unrewarding mission, even if the emperor wasn't exiling the crown prince, he was still giving him a warning or a disguised punishment. But now, these soldiers and officials were a bit puzzled. What could the emperor not be satisfied with such an outstanding crown prince? A green curtain had been pulled up in the forest for the crown prince to rest. Everyone knew that it was mainly for the convenience of the crown prince's official duties. Although the crown prince had shared weal and woe with everyone along the way, they couldn't have a proper crown prince squat with everyone by the side of the road and defecate naked. Li Qingqian smiled helplessly at the imperial soldiers pulling the curtain. He lifted a corner of the curtain and walked in. However, he didn't undo his pants. He just waited calmly and slightly nervously. Not long after, a hand pinched a pill and sent it into the green grasshopper. It was clear that this had happened more than once. The Crown Prince directly accepted it, chewed it, and swallowed it. He then used the tip of his tongue to carefully lick the gap between his teeth to make sure there wouldn't be any medicinal residue left and be discovered by the eunuchs who were supposed to serve him but were secretly monitoring him. "Why can't you give this medicine to those soldiers?" The Crown Prince was silent for a moment. He then spoke to the faint shadow outside the curtain. His tone was slightly sad. 7 people have already died along the way. There was too much poisonous miasma in Nanzhao. Although the Imperial Academy of Medicine had prepared excellent medicine, there were still a few Imperial soldiers and eunuchs who accidentally inhaled the miasma and died. The shadow outside the curtain paused for a moment and then said, "Your Highness, I find that I like you more and more." After saying this, 13th Wang shook his head and disappeared without a sound. The Crown Prince crouched down and furrowed his brows slightly. He knew that 13th Wang had been sent by Fan Xian, but he didn't know why Fan Xian was so careful to protect him. However, Fan Xian's words were clear. He didn't need to accept any favors from him. However, he didn't like the feeling of an ace following him from afar. He had once tried to have that person give all the medicine to him. However, he had eunuchs serving him every night. If someone discovered that the Crown Prince had medicine of unknown origin on him, it would indeed be a big problem. However, without medicine on him, he couldn't save anyone. Thinking of the people who had died along the way, the Crown Prince couldn't help but sigh. He had behaved very well these days, to the point where he couldn't be any better. He knew what kind of person his father was. His father was looking for an excuse to depose him. If he couldn't find an excuse that wouldn't damage the emperor's reputation, his father wouldn't act in a hurry. His father cared too much about his reputation, Li Qingqian thought with a slight smile. Standing up, he threw the used paper onto the ground, thinking, what was the difference between something like face and paper used to wipe one's butt? However, he indeed needed it. At least, because of this, Li Qingqian could hold on for a while longer. A stubborn expression rose to his face. "Father, I won't give you too many excuses. If you want to depose me, then don't think you can keep your reputation." He pulled open the curtain and walked out. Looking at the piercing sunlight in the sky, he suddenly thought of the child by the coffin of the Nanzhao king. Slightly absent-minded, he thought to himself that they were both crown princes. For a father to die early was actually a fortunate thing. Chapter 5:15. After many months of trekking, Crown Prince Li Qingqian and his group finally returned to Jingdou from the distant Nanzhao kingdom. The road outside Jingdou was not paved with yellow earth or sprinkled with clear water. The green-black stone road smoothly stuck to the ground, welcoming the return of the heir apparent. The lush willows on either side of the road nodded slightly with the hot wind, indicating to the Crown Prince. Outside the city gates, welcoming the Crown Prince's return were the civil and military officials of the court, as well as the 3 princes who had stayed in the capital. After the greetings, the Crown Prince gently helped his 2 elder brothers and younger brother up. Holding hands and looking at each other, he gently spoke of the situation after they parted. The great prince looked at the Crown Prince with concern. After confirming that this difficult journey had not tortured his younger brother too much, he finally relaxed. Like everyone else, he was guessing why his father had given this task to the Crown Prince. However, his status was different from other people's. Additionally, his personality was indifferent, so he was not willing to think too deeply. In any case, what happened had nothing to do with him. It was fine as long as Qingqian was fine. The second prince, who had been silent in the manor for almost half a year, welcomed the Crown Prince's return with his trademark smile. However, there was something else in his smile that seeped into the Crown Prince's heart bit by bit. The crown prince smiled slightly at him and nodded his head. He didn't say anything. Li Qingqian held the third prince's hand and looked at the quiet and obedient face of the little boy beside him. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The situation had developed to this day, but his youngest brother had already faintly become his greatest opponent. It was truly difficult to understand. He suddenly thought of the new king of Nanzhao. He seemed to be about the same age as the third prince. His heart suddenly trembled. His hand holding the third prince's hand unconsciously loosened. However, before his index finger had completely curled up, he reacted and gently and seriously held the little hand again. The crown prince knew that his third brother was much smarter than the snot-nosed king of Nanzhao. Furthermore, his teacher was Fan Xian. However, the third prince's gaze as he looked at the crown prince appeared very calm. It far exceeded the calmness a child should have. Furthermore, there was not a trace of other emotions. A few of the dragon sons stood outside the city gates, each with their own thoughts. The crown prince lowered his head slightly and looked at the lonely shadows in the sunlight. He thought with some sadness that it seemed that father and son killing each other was unavoidable. Did brothers also have to hack at each other? The crown prince entered the palace, bowed, replied to the letter, kowtowed to the emperor, and returned to the palace. All of the procedures were as normal and smooth as the Ministry of Rites and the two temples had stipulated. There was not a single problem. At least, no one noticed that the emperor and the crown prince's expressions were the slightest bit abnormal. However, people noticed that the emperor seemed to be a bit tired and did not keep the crown prince in Taiji Palace to talk. It was completely unlike the expression a son who had not seen for nearly half a year should have when he returned home. He allowed the crown prince to return to the eastern palace. Led by eunuch Yao, the crown prince arrived outside the eastern palace. He raised his head to look at the eastern palace that had been repaired and couldn't help but sigh in shock. That day, he had burned down this beautiful and magnificent palace. It had only been a few months, but it had been repaired to its original state. It looked like his father really didn't want to make the matter too sensational. He suddenly stilled and turned his head to ask eunuch Yao, "I want to go pay my respects to the Empress Dowager later. Is that possible?" Eunuch Yao paused. He was responsible for escorting the crown prince back to the eastern palace. Naturally, he reported to the emperor to secretly monitor him. He had to ensure that the crown prince could only return to the palace. This was a disguised form of house arrest. However, the crown prince had suddenly asked and used such a reason. Eunuch Yao could not say anything. He laughed bitterly and slowly lowered his body. In a slightly sharp voice, he said, "Your Highness has scared me. You are the master. You want to go see the Empress Dowager. Why are you asking me?" The crown prince smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. He pushed open the main doors of the eastern palace. As he entered, he unconsciously glanced in the direction of Guangxin Palace. He knew that his aunt had already been imprisoned in a side courtyard of the royal palace and was being guarded by the people of the Overwatch Council. The Guangxin Palace that he was familiar with and yearned for was already empty, but he still couldn't resist greedily glancing in that direction. To the side, eunuch Yao carefully and inconspicuously watched the crown prince's expression. The crown prince acted as if he didn't exist and stared in that direction in a daze. He thought to himself, as people lived in this world, there were always so many demons. He didn't know who was possessed or who was crazy. He thought of the words his aunt had said, and his heart began to thump. Yes, people were crazy. The world was crazy. Everyone in the royal family had crazy genes. If he wanted to own the world, he had to be crazy to the end. Because of his craziness and self-control, he turned around again and smiled warmly at eunuch Yao. He then closed the main doors of the eastern palace. Logically, the act of closing the doors should be done by serving girls and eunuchs. However, the number of eunuchs and serving girls in the Eastern Palace was far less than the number set by etiquette. A few months ago, hundreds of eunuchs and serving girls disappeared without reason. No one knew where they went. The Crown Prince knew they went underground. Although the Eastern Palace had been replenished with many eunuchs and serving girls, these newbies were clearly nervous. So many people had died in the royal palace. Naturally, it couldn't be hidden for long. However, no official dared to ask. For one, this was not something they should care about. For two, the officials were also afraid of death. Along the way, serving girls and eunuchs kowtowed in greeting, but no one dared to come forward to serve. The Crown Prince laughed self-mockingly and entered the main hall. Then, he furrowed his brows and sniffed. He smelled a thick smell of alcohol. A thick, nauseating smell of alcohol floated in the most noble palace in the Qin kingdom. The light in the hall was dim. There were only a few tall lamps lit. Li Qingqian was startled and regained his sight. Only then did he see a familiar woman lying on the couch. To the side of the screen, a large leaf fan produced by the palace treasury was being waved. It fanned a light breeze and dispersed the suffocating smell in the hall. The woman wore a luxurious palace dress, but the decorations were terrible. Her hair was a bit unkempt. She held a wine jug in her hand and was currently pouring wine into her mouth. Between her brows was a haggard and hopeless expression. The person holding the large leaf fan was a young eunuch whose appearance could not be seen clearly. Li Qingqian furrowed his brows in disgust. Shortly after, he sighed. A glimmer of gentleness and pity rose in his eyes as he walked forward. He knew why his mother had become like this. He also loathed how she usually pretended to be mysterious. Once the truth was revealed, she would panic beyond belief. However, she was, after all, his mother. "Mother, I'm back." The half-drunk empress was startled. She rubbed her eyes and looked for a moment before she saw clearly that the young man in front of her was her son. A moment later, she suddenly burst into tears and sat up unsteadily. She threw herself in front of the Crown Prince and hugged him. Wailing, she said, "It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back." The Crown Prince hugged his mother's body and smiled warmly. "I've been gone for many months. I've made you worry." A glimmer of joy flashed through the Empress's eyes. She said unclearly, "It's good that you're alive. I thought I would never see you again." Ever since the Emperor had sent the Crown Prince to Nanzhao, the Empress's mind had been immersed in despair. She and the Emperor had been husband and wife for 20 years. Of course, she knew how heartless and terrifying the man on the dragon chair was. She had originally thought that it would be difficult for the Crown Prince to return after going south this time. Seeing her son alive and well, she couldn't help but be overjoyed. She found a fleeting glimmer of hope in her despair. The Crown Prince smiled self-mockingly. He hugged his mother and patted her back, comforting her with a few words. Up until now, the Empress still did not know why the Emperor had suddenly given up on the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince also did not tell her the truth. Although the people of the royal family were crazy, they did a pretty good job in the area of filial piety. Thus, the Crown Prince did not plan on telling his mother how many dangers and difficulties he had encountered along the way. If it wasn't for someone secretly helping him, even if he could return alive, he would probably be bedridden and unable to rise again. Before long, the half-drunk Empress gradually fell asleep in the Crown Prince's arms. The Crown Prince carried her to the bed and pulled over a thin embroidered towel. He waved his hand to stop the eunuch who was pulling the large leaf fan. He took out a round fan and began to carefully fan the Empress. After fanning for a long time and confirming that his mother had fallen asleep, the Crown Prince threw down the round fan and sat by the bed in a daze. Burying his head deeply between his knees, he did not raise it for a long time. He raised his head. His face was slightly pale. His gaze drifted to the side. Looking at the only eunuch in this empty and lonely palace, he asked, "Has the Empress often drunk these days?" "Yes." The young eunuch walked out of the shadows and knelt down respectfully. Looking at the eunuch's raised face, the crown prince was shocked. He immediately furrowed his brows and said with slight mockery, "There are over 100 people in the Eastern Palace. Now, only you are still alive." The eunuch was none other than the original head eunuch of the Eastern Palace, Hongzhu. A glimmer of guilt rose to Hongzhu's face. He lowered his head and didn't say anything. Up to this point, all of the servants in the Eastern Palace had been silenced by the emperor's edict. Only he was alive. This already explained all of the truth. Although Hongzhu had never told the emperor, he had told Fan Xian. All of this seemed to have started because of this, so the guilt on Hongzhu's face was not fake. During his days in the Eastern Palace, the Empress and the Crown Prince had both treated him well, particularly the Empress who had been especially warm to him. These days, he had been following the Emperor's strict orders to secretly serve and monitor the Empress. Seeing how the mother of the nation had gone from disappointment to despair, using alcohol day and night to numb herself, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of pity in his heart. The Crown Prince looked at him calmly and suddenly smiled unhappily. He said to himself, "At the beginning, I thought you had offended Fan Xian, which was why father had sent you here. So, I had forgotten. In the end, you are someone from the royal study. Then, is the enmity between you and the Duke of Danbo real?" "It is real," Hongzhu lowered his head and replied. "However, I am a citizen of the Qing kingdom. Naturally, I will follow the emperor's orders." For some reason, the crown prince suddenly flew into a rage. Casually grabbing something beside him, he threw it over and cursed loudly, "You eunuch, how dare you call yourself a citizen?" The thing he threw out was the round fan he had fanned the Empress with earlier. It floated lightly and didn't hit Hongzhu. Instead, it floated down beside Hongzhu and landed on the lapel of the eunuch's robes. The crown prince was afraid of waking up the Empress and calmed his breathing with great difficulty. He looked at Hongzhu with a hateful gaze. "It looks like the emperor truly likes you. Knowing such a major matter, he still left you with your dog life." Hongzhu kowtowed twice and asked with some confusion, "Your Highness, what is it?" The crown prince came to his senses and was silent for a moment. He then suddenly said, "The Eastern Palace is not what it used to be. What are you still doing here? If you want to leave, I will go and tell father." Hongzhu's expression was hesitant. A moment later, he gritted his teeth and said, "I want to stay in the Eastern Palace." "Stay in the Eastern Palace to monitor?" The crown prince lowered his voice and said mockingly. "The entire palace is filled with spies. Who cares if you are one more?" Now that things had developed to this point, the crown prince knew that the emperor was going to depose him. Since that was the case, why was he still putting on an act in this secret palace? "I want to serve the Empress." After the crown prince was silent for a moment, he suddenly sighed. A trace of pity rose to his face. He gazed at Hongzhu and said, "Xiao also died?" Kneeling on the ground, Hongzhu's body trembled. After a long time, he nodded his head sorrowfully. The crown prince gazed calmly at Hongzhu and asked a question that, logically speaking, would never have an answer. "What has happened in the palace these few months?" Hongzhu was silent for a long time. He then said, "The emperor went to Hanguang Palace a few times. Each time he came out, he was not very happy." The crown prince had a slight smile on his face. His mood relaxed slightly. He looked at Hongzhu with approval and said, "Thank you." Hongzhu lowered his head and said, "I wouldn't dare." The crown prince sat by the side of the bed and began to think. It was clear that his father had not told the Empress Dowager the truth of this matter. Although the emperor moved unhindered under heaven and no one dared to stop him, an emperor like his father was still troubled by a thread of ties in his heart. For example, his face was like toilet paper, and that filial piety. The Qing kingdom paid particular attention to using filial piety to rule the world. The emperor had put a cage around himself. Li Qingqian clenched his fists tightly. He knew he still had some time. His father was going to depose him and needed time to arrange the discussion. Even if the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council wanted to create that kind of rumor, it would not be easy. Xiao died. I wonder how Hongzhu feels, Fan Xian said quietly. If it was a normal eunuch, perhaps he wouldn't think too much about it. However, I know that Hongzhu has never been a simple eunuch. He has studied and been enlightened, so he cares about gratitude and grudges and values friendship. When all is said and done, the reason Xiao was killed is my problem and his problem. It was the two of us who single-handedly caused the deaths of hundreds of people in the royal palace. He furrowed his brows. When it comes to the emperor's ruthlessness, it seems that our imagination is still lacking. Fine, even if Hongzhu doesn't hate me, he must hate himself. Will there be any trouble like this? He once again said, fine, and then said with great sadness, but those hundreds of deaths were caused by me. Yes, I am a very indifferent and emotionless person. In the end, I am not a monster like Uncle Wuzhu. I still feel strange in my heart. In the past, I told Haitang that if I killed dozens or hundreds of people, I wouldn't even blink. But I can't be the emperor because I can't keep calm when tens of thousands of people die in front of me. The emperor wanted to depose the crown prince because I secretly influenced him. Of course, even if I didn't influence it, this matter would have exploded in the end. Fan Xian shook his head. But, now, I want the emperor to not depose the crown prince so quickly. Why? Isn't this very senseless and absurd? What exactly am I afraid of? After the oil is added to the raging fire, it will be the leftovers from the cold pot. He laughed self-mockingly. If the crown prince, second prince, and eldest princess are finished, then I will be the leftovers. Even if the emperor truly loves me and is willing to take me to conquer a great world, you also know that I am a pacifist. Yes, a very hypocritical pacifist. I don't like fighting. Haven't I done so many things these 2 years to maintain my current state? Thus, I have to delay a bit. At least, before I am ready, I cannot let the emperor enter the path of preparing for war. When the time comes, I will have the eldest prince lead the army and have me be the supervisor. We will kill our way into northern Qi and Dongyi. Our knives will be full of dead souls. Just thinking about these days of blood and iron makes me sad. This is the main hidden contradiction. You know that. After Fan Xian said this, he put away the piece of paper in front of him and placed it back into the box. He then began to sigh. He was angry at his own curiosity. Each time, he couldn't resist taking out his mother's letter and reading it again. Each time, it was very troublesome. He was in Hangzhou, in Hua Garden. The large box in front of the door was still open. The snowflake silver inside flickered with a beautiful light. Like Minister Fan, he had also learned to speak to a piece of paper. However, his father was facing a portrait. He didn't have that ability, so he could only speak to the letter. There were many things that could not be said to others. The only people he could say were not by his side, so Fan Xian had a hard time holding it in. There had been a period of time in the past when he had even treated Wang Qinian as his best listener. In order to prevent the old man from being frightened into a heart attack by his words, he had finally stopped his mental torture of Wang Qinian. Uncle Wuzhu was not here. Ruoruo was not here. Wan was not here. Haitang was not here. Even if he had 1,000 words, to whom could he pour them out? Where could he find support for thoughts that were rebellious and could not tolerate this world? Fan Xian began to gradually feel that sense of loneliness. The meaning hidden in, "I am very lonely." Chapter 5:16. In reality, every person, at certain times, would look back at their life, trace back the past, and look forward to the future. This was the so-called yesterday, today, and tomorrow. However, under normal circumstances, this kind of work was often only begun after people had grown tired of life or after they had reached a certain goal. The most common model was an old man fishing beside the Wei River while sighing about how life was like the flowing water under one's feet, flowing east and never returning. Fan Xian was not Ku He. He did not have the hobby of fishing, and he was still young. However, his life had one more repetition than anyone else in this world. Calculating carefully, he should be a middle-aged man in his 30s, about to know his destiny. However, he was forced to stay in a beautiful, fragrant bag. The word "forced" was a bit pretentious, so let's not talk about it for now. However, he would still carry out some reflection. It was not holding a beautiful woman and lamenting that he did not work hard for the good and just cause of humanity. Rather, he was searching for clarity in a kind of chaos, trying to find his determination and clear goal again. The present him was a bit muddled. After being reborn, he had always been a person with a firm goal. On the cliff, he had once made 3 great wishes to Uncle Wu Zhu with the 3 representatives as the foundation. Up to now, the 3 great wishes had basically been fulfilled. However, there were few people who were as lustful as Fan Xian. The number of women by his side had never increased. The foundation of the 3 great wishes was to continue living. For the sake of this goal, he had always worked hard, tough, and cold-blooded. Furthermore, the hidden skill or additional attribute of the 3 great wishes was the life ideal he had spoken of to Minister Fan, a powerful official. Presently, in the Qing kingdom and under heaven, Fan Xian could truly be called a powerful official. Wherever he went, no one disrespected him and no one did not fear him. However, it was truly like this. In the end, the young man who knew his destiny still became muddled. Was this really the life he wanted? He was walking alone on the road from Hua Garden to the Jiangnan governor's mansion. "I seem to have written a wrong place yesterday, sorry." He lowered his head like a philosopher, but a few tiger guards followed behind him. There were also many Overwatch Council secret agents protecting him from the shadows on both sides of the street. Sir Fan Jr. Duke. Imperial Envoy. Commissioner. A string of names full of passion, flattery, and slight fear rang out from beside him. Fan Xian was startled and raised his head in astonishment. He found that he had already walked into the Jiangnan governor's manor. The officials of Jiangnan were standing on either side of him, looking at him with gazes full of affection and unspeakable passion and gentleness. It was as if the entire yamen, with his arrival, had suddenly been filled with countless fine horses that had eaten bad fodder, farting thunderously. Fan Xian unconsciously scratched his head, not minding that this action had lost some of his official prestige. He laughed self-mockingly, driving away all the metaphysical things that had surrounded his mind earlier. Yes, life did indeed need a goal, but perhaps it was too early for him to start doubting life. Newton didn't become a real swindler until he was old, while Xiao Ai spent the latter half of her life gnashing her teeth at the Unification Army. However, these 2 people were, after all, back to the basics. Who was she? In the end, he was still a commoner. He had to admit that he still enjoyed the benefits of vanity, power, money, and fame. As Fan Xian greeted the officials amiably, he walked toward the study of the governor's manor. He thought to himself that he was different from Yi Qingmei. It was best not to sprinkle the glory of idealism on himself. In this world, no, in all worlds, idealists were lonely and easy to die a violent death. Fan Xian could not accept either of these. It's better to be an honest official, he thought to himself. However, when he walked into Xueqing's study and chatted with Xueqing for a long time with his head lowered, he began to laugh at himself inside. Was being a powerful official something that could be done just because one wanted to? That would depend on whether or not the emperor allowed it. A muddle-headed and incompetent emperor could be controlled by a powerful official, but how could someone like the emperor give him such an opportunity? He had lived for over 30 years, how could he still be so naive and adorable? He stretched lazily and narrowed his eyes at Xueqing, who was resting with his eyes closed. He cursed silently in his heart and opened his mouth to say, things like checking accounts can be left to the Ministry of Revenue. The palace treasury has always been managed by the Overwatch Council. Why did the Imperial Censorate suddenly get involved? Didn't the Imperial Censors all go to prison a few months ago? Where did the Imperial Censorate find so many people to check accounts? Even if there were enough people, those people who only know how to stick to their books would probably faint when they saw the numbers on the accounts. Sir Xue, you have to submit a memorial on this matter. Jiangnan is fine, yet some people have come. It is truly unbearable. Xueqing smiled and cursed silently in his heart. The Ministry of Revenue was opened by your old man, the Overwatch Council was managed by you, and the palace treasury was sat on by you. What was there to check? Jingdo had long had objections to this matter. Now, the Hall of Governmental Affairs had come up with a new idea. They were afraid that you would steal everything from the palace treasury and sell it. However, Fan Xian had been in Jiangnan for a year and a half and worked well with Xueqing. The two of them had a tacit understanding. Who knew how much Xueqing had profited from him? These words could not be said clearly. After thinking for a bit, he said, it's not impossible to have someone come to check, but you have a long-standing grudge with the Imperial Censorate. If you have them investigate, who knows if they will use their power to avenge a personal grudge? These words could only ever be said in private by these high-ranking officials. Can they not be stopped? Do that old man Xu Wu and Hu the scholar have nothing better to do? In any case, there were no outsiders in the study, so Fan Xian spoke angrily. However, he knew that although it was the Hall of Governmental Affairs who had sent the letter, it was actually the Emperor's intention. Having him hold the palace treasury and Overwatch Council in one hand was, in the end, not a suitable method. He had mixed a handful of Hizongwei sand into the Overwatch Council in Jingdo and had been suppressed to the point of not daring to breathe by Ping Ping. Fan Xian was wary of whether or not the emperor did not believe his explanation regarding Zhaoshang Money House or was wary of his relationship with the northern Qi people. As for the matter of smuggling, he didn't care much. The eldest princess had already been gone for a decade, and he had only earned a year's worth of profit. With the flip of his hand, he had sent so much silver to the national treasury. The emperor would not be so stingy. Seeing Fan Xian's slightly unhappy expression, Xueqing laughed and comfortingly said, it's all for the people in court to see. What are you worried about? Even if they sent an imperial envoy to lead the 3 departments to investigate, with a flip of your hand, who would be able to find anything? Don't forget, you are also an imperial envoy. Xueqing flipped his hand and took advantage of the situation to grab the cup of tea on the table and take a sip. Fan Xian stared at his steady hand and a thought flashed through his mind. Xueqing knew a little about the smuggling matter, but he didn't know the inside story, which was why he appeared so calm. If he knew that Fan Xian was secretly damaging the interests of the Qing kingdom, this old man would probably throw this cup of tea to the ground in shock. He was just about to pour some more oil and add to the fire when he unexpectedly saw Xueqing put down the teacup and change his expression to one of seriousness. When interacting in officialdom, particularly between a local emperor like Xueqing and a prince like Fan Xian, they would talk about important matters in a joking manner. This was to prevent them from feeling too estranged from each other and having an undesirable tendency towards coldness. Thus, it was the first time Fan Xian had seen Xueqing's serious expression. He couldn't help but furrow his brows. Xueqing was silent for a long time. He then slowly opened his mouth and said, "Sir Fan Jr., you know more about the Jingdo matter than I do. What is your opinion?" "Opinion? Opinion my ass. I have no opinion at all on such a major matter." Fan Xian closed his mouth and didn't make a sound. He only smiled and looked at the beard on Xueqing's chin as if he admired it. In any case, in this world, other than the great grandmasters and the emperor, he wasn't afraid of anyone. Naturally, he dared to put on such a clay statue appearance. Xueqing coughed and looked at Fan Xian's appearance. He knew that his question was too unprofessional and that the other party's shamelessness was even better than his. He smiled self-mockingly. After thinking for a moment, he straightforwardly said, "Let's be frank. The emperor is going to depose the heir." Fan Xian was startled as if he hadn't heard these words clearly. A moment later, he came to his senses and abruptly stood up. Staring into Xueqing's eyes, he didn't speak for a long time. He was indeed shocked in his heart. He was not shocked at the deposed heir or that Xueqing was discussing it with him. He was shocked that since Xueqing dared to say it to his face, it was certainly not something he had guessed. Rather, the emperor in the palace had already leaked the news to his loyal followers. At the same time, he was beginning to spread the news in all directions through him. Was public opinion about to begin? Xueqing's fingers gently tapped the surface of the table. Looking at him, he smiled slightly and said, "Sir Fan Jr., why are you so shocked? Isn't this within your expectations?" He suddenly sighed. A trace of pity flashed between his brows. Slowly, he said, "Actually, I'm not afraid of you knowing. I've already submitted memorials to persuade the emperor to give up on this idea. However, it was to no avail." "You want me to also submit memorials?" Fan Xian looked at him. Xueqing said with slight mockery, "Everyone knows what your relationship with the crown prince is. I am not that stupid." Pausing for a moment, he quietly said, "The emperor has already made up his mind. As officials, we can only act according to the rules." Speaking of this, Xueqing paused again. It seemed that he was also very confused. The crown prince had clearly grown up these 2 years. He was sincere and had improved in all areas. Why did the emperor suddenly want to depose the heir? However, he faintly guessed that something must have happened within the royal family. In front of Fan Xian, the illegitimate son of the royal family, he would not voice his doubts. Fan Xian thought for a moment and then asked, "How many people know of this matter?" "In Jiangnan, of course, only you and I know," Xueqing said. "However, I believe that the governors of the 7 roads have all received the emperor's secret edict. It all depends on when everyone will submit the edict." Fan Xian laughed coldly in his heart. The emperor was truly ruthless, even to the point of being muddle-headed. The crown prince's performance this year had been excellent. Not only did he not make any mistakes on his trip to Nanzhao, he had also won the praise of everyone in court. Presumably, if the emperor wanted to depose the heir, it would be too difficult to find an excuse. However, although the words of the 7 roads governors had great power, they were, after all, officials. Who would lead them to do such a thing? Even if it was the emperor's secret edict, the 7 governors were not idiots. Presumably, they would not believe that they would have any good ending if they participated in the battle for the throne. Xueqing seemed to see what he was thinking and slowly said, "Presumably, I am the first official to submit a memorial to admonish the emperor for deposing the heir." Fan Xian calmly gazed into Xueqing's eyes. He knew that this person was loyal to the emperor, but he had not thought that he would be loyal to such a degree. The reason? He furrowed his brows and reminded the other party. Xue Qing smiled slightly and looked at Fan Xian. This is the reason I invited you here today. The emperor's meaning is clear. The 8th bureau should be moving. Fan Xian had already returned to his chair. He tilted his head slightly and was lost in thought. To depose the heir, he had to use the 8th bureau of the Overwatch Council to start. Back in the day, many of the Crown Prince's weaknesses had fallen into the hands of the Internal Court and Overwatch Council. Additionally, there was the Jiangnan Ming family lawsuit regarding the battle for the legitimate eldest son's right to inheritance. No matter how one looked at this matter, if the emperor wanted to depose the Crown Prince, he should be the lackey. His expression was calm. It was impossible to see the agitation in his heart. A moment later, he said, the places are places, and Jingdo is Jingdo. If it is just these actions, the backlash from the court will be great. The scholars of the Hall of Governmental Affairs will not watch as the Crown Prince is deposed for no reason. What he said was the truth. The civil officials wholeheartedly worked for the Qing kingdom and sought stability. Regarding the emperor's seemingly absurd action, they would strongly oppose it. Who knew how many more strikes of the cane would ring out in court? In particular, the Overwatch Council cannot appear, Fan Xian said with his head lowered. Fan Xian lowered his head and said, it is not convenient for me to appear. The Overwatch Council is a secret agency. I have never been on good terms with the Crown Prince. If some words come out of my mouth, it will only have the opposite effect. Your words are reasonable. I will report to the emperor, Xue Qing said after thinking for a bit. Xue Qing thought about it and then said, there is something His Majesty wants me to tell you. In a few days, His Majesty will go to worship the heavens. Fan Xian was surprised again. He furrowed his brows for a long time before he slowly understood. Although the way of ghosts and gods could not prevail in the Qing kingdom and was not as deeply rooted in the hearts of the people as northern Qi's Tianyi Dao, they still had great respect for the illusory temple. If the emperor could actually create some heavenly revelation, with public opinion attacking the Crown Prince first, the governors of the 7 roads sending in memorials, and then finding some officials to accuse the Crown Prince of being immoral and unfit to inherit the country, in the end, the emperor was put in a difficult position. He personally went to worship heaven in the temple and accepted heaven's order to depose the heir. What an absurd play, what a senseless trick. Fan Xian shook his head and asked, when? You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.